Welcome to the BYU China Conference. At this time, we ask everyone to silence all electronics to prevent distractions during the event.
尊敬的各位来宾，亲爱的各位同学们，欢迎来到杨百翰大学中国峰会。在此，为避免影响会议的正常进程，请大家将您的电子设备调至静音。
My name is Jeff Freeman. I'm a former co-president of the China Conference. This is Helena He. She is a former committee member on the China Conference Committee and a former president of the BYU Chinese Student and Scholar Association.
我是何坤林，曾任杨百翰大学中国学生学者联合会会长，也曾任杨百翰大学中国峰会部门负责人。这位是文嘉丽，曾任杨百翰大学中国峰会联合主席。
It's our privilege on behalf of the organizing committee to welcome you here today. We know that you're all excited for this incredible opportunity it is to meet together at this annual event and hear from our distinguished speakers. Thank you for coming and for sacrificing a casual Saturday to be with us. We promise that your time will be well spent.
我们很荣幸代表峰会全体组委会欢迎各位嘉宾及与会者，感谢大家在百忙之中抽出宝贵的星期六早上的时间参与我们峰会。
BYU China Conference is an annual student-run event founded in 2015. The conference invites prominent individuals in academics, government, business, culture, and religion to offer insights and ideas focused on shaping the future of Chinese-American business and cultural relationships.
杨百翰大学中国峰会始于2015年，作为学生领导主办的年度会议。中国峰会旨在邀请商界、学术界、政治界、艺术界和宗教界等界的各界名人来分享他们对中国商业和文化关系的见解和看法。
The mission of the BYU China Conference is to promote the values of Brigham Young University by developing people of faith, intellect, and character who have the skills and the desire to continue learning and to serve others throughout their lives.
峰会旨在培养有信仰、有智慧、有品格、有能力，并渴望通过不断学习来终身为他人服务的杨百翰大学学生。
We also seek to strengthen cross-cultural ties by building a lifelong, supportive, and integrative Chinese community and providing educational, professional, and cultural opportunities to aid individuals and communities in their growth and progression.
峰会希望建立一个长久、相互支持、环境融洽的华人社会，并且在提供教育、专业和文化机会的帮助下，帮助个人和社区的成长以及进步。
As BYU is a religious college sponsored by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we typically begin and end our meetings with a prayer. Our opening prayer will be given by Hans Harrison, co-director of corporate outreach.
作为耶稣基督后期圣徒教会旗下的学校，我们一般会在开会和闭会期间进行祈祷。接下来，我们将有请峰会外联部部长赫汉斯做开会祈祷。
Our Father in heaven, we are so grateful for this opportunity to come together as a group of people that are committed and interested in Chinese and American relations. We're grateful for this wonderful opportunity to hear from so many great speakers from a variety of backgrounds and industries, whether it's education or government. We ask thee to bless us at this time, that we'll be able to enjoy our time, to be able to listen to the speakers and each other and create connections and create an opportunity of learning and growth. We're so grateful for this wonderful Saturday, the great weather that God has bestowed upon us. And we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
On the back of each of your programs is a QR code. Throughout the meeting, you may have questions that you would like answers to, and we invite you to use that QR code to submit your questions for our panel session following lunch.
午餐后，我们将回到这里进行座谈会。在会议进程中，我们邀请大家通过会议进程单背面的二维码提交相关问题。我们将在座谈会前截止提交。
Today's opening remarks will be given by Dr. Renata Forst.
我们将邀请杨百翰大学国际部副主席 Renata Forst 为我们带来开会致辞。
Dr. Forst is currently responsible for overseeing continuing education, performing arts management, and the David M. Kennedy Center for International Studies. She has served as an associate dean in the College of Family, Home, and Social Sciences, as well as department chair of the sociology department. Recently, Dr. Forst has served as the director of the David M. Kennedy Center for International Studies and associate international vice president.
Forst 博士曾担任杨百翰大学家庭和社会学学院副院长以及社会学系主任。近年来 ，Forst 博士曾担任大卫肯尼迪国际中心研究中心主任和助理国际副主席。
I'm very pleased to welcome you this morning to Brigham Young University for the China Conference. And I extend a special welcome to our speakers and our guests. And I applaud the hard work of the Student Executive Committee and the Advisory Board to make this conference possible. My graduate training and scholarship is in demography. And in particular, I have studied maternal and child well-being. As a demographer, I recognize the importance of demographic trends underlying economic and social well-being across the globe. Of the 8 billion people on the planet today, about 1.4 billion live in China. Like many economically developed countries, China's fertility rate is declining as the population is aging. The global total fertility rate, which is the average number of children born to a woman based upon age-specific fertility rates, is 2.3, compared to 1.4 in China, which is well below replacement level. Fertility levels in China are declining because of a decrease in the number of women of childbearing age, and because women are marrying and having children later in life. Reduced fertility in China was also the goal of the one-child policy that was initiated in the early 1980s. This policy has been eased since 2015, but as in many European countries, most government efforts to increase fertility rates have had minimal impact. Mortality rates in China are also low and comparable to other high-income or more developed countries. Life expectancy at birth, which is the average years of life expected giving current age-specific mortality rates, is 72 years globally and 78 years in China. Low fertility and low mortality result in an aging population. China in particular is experiencing a rapidly aging population as well as slowing population growth. China's population may reach the point soon where mortality rates exceed birth rates and the population begins to decline. Both fertility and mortality influence the dependency ratio, or the ratio of the working population to the dependent population, which is defined as children under age 15 and the elderly 65 and older. Globally, 25% of the population is under age 15 compared to 18% in China. In contrast, only 10% of the world population is 65 and older, compared to 14% in China. The dependency ratio in China has increased from 34 dependents in 2011 to 45 per 100 workers in 2020, meaning that there are more dependents per worker to support. This increase in the dependency ratio in China is still much lower than that of other nations such as Germany and Japan, but the concern in China is the speed at which the dependency ratio is increasing. By 2050, the United Nations estimates that there will be more older adults in China than the current total population in the United States. Implications of an aging population include the need for greater worker productivity and an increased burden on the healthcare system. Greater worker productivity may come from increased automation, accompanied by investment in education and vocational training, to free working-age people from low-skilled jobs and to help workers pivot to more high-skilled school positions. Because of changing demographics, China's employers may need to shift to new employment models and HR strategies for attracting and retaining talent. As populations age, further burdens are placed on healthcare systems. and in China, these burdens are not uniform. Older, rural adults in China have poor health outcomes relative to urban older adults. And in addition, many young people have left rural areas for opportunities in cities, which has depleted available caregivers for the elderly in rural communities. Older Chinese women also fare worse than men in many health outcomes. A recent report by the Population Reference Bureau concluded that, quote, on the one hand, in China, rapid economic growth has contributed to rising life expectancy and lower levels of disability. Rising educational attainment, especially among women, should lead to further improvements in health and reductions in health disparities among older adults. China's healthcare system has also improved as the government has expanded access to public health services in both urban and rural areas. On the other hand, rapid urbanization is separating millions of older adults from their adult children. Rising obesity rates, high smoking prevalence, and high levels of pollution also raise serious concerns about the health of China's older adults in coming decades. These health challenges will be exacerbated by rapid demographic change. China has the world's largest population of older adults and is experiencing population aging on an unprecedented and unstoppable scale. China's challenges will be shared by leaders in many other developing countries that have experienced rapid declines in fertility and mortality in recent decades. Studying the factors associated with health aging in China can help policymakers and planners address the looming shortage of caregivers and improve the health and well-being of older adults, end quote. Now, I'm a member of this older adult population in the US, not quite a dependent yet, but it's my hope that our students at BYU will grapple with the challenges of an aging population, both for the future of China as well as the US. And I have confidence in our students and in BYU's strong and enduring ties with China. Since the historic Young Ambassadors Tour in 1979, BYU has maintained a deep and significant relationship with China. In addition to the 33 performing arts tours that have visited China, we have also sent BYU students to study abroad in Nanjing and other locations for almost 40 years. We have trained and placed approximately 1,700 teachers at almost 100 partner universities in 30-plus years of the China Teachers Program. And we have hosted 7 Chinese ambassadors on the BYU campus since 1996. Almost every college at BYU has been involved in serious research and educational activities in China. We are, as recent ambassador and current Chinese Foreign Minister Qin Gang said, quote, the oldest and truest of friends. This conference is an opportunity to hear and learn from experts, to network, and to discuss the important role and future of China. It's an opportunity to strengthen the relationship between BYU and the Chinese people. I welcome you to BYU and hope you enjoy the conference. Thank you.
Our first speaker will be Dr. Kirk Larson.
我们第一位演讲者是杨百翰大学历史系教授 Kirk Larson。
An associate professor of history, Dr. Larson specializes in the histories of modern Korea, modern China, and early and modern East Asian international relations. He earned a PhD in history at Harvard University. Joining the BYU faculty in 2008, he teaches courses in Korean, Chinese, East Asian, and world history. His publications include Tradition, Treaties, and Trade, Qing Imperialism in Choson, Korea. His next book, Pirates, Soldiers, Diplomats, Cannibals, and Other Savages, Historical Memories of Early Korean-American Relations, is forthcoming. He has published, presented, and commented on a variety of contemporary issues, including East Asian foreign relations, national North Korea, nationalism and elections in South Korea, and Sino-Korean relations. He has appeared on ABC, MSNBC, VOA, the Canadian Broadcast System, and Al Jazeera.
Larson 博士专注于研究现代韩国、现代中国以及 近代早期和东亚国际关系。他于2000年获得哈佛大学博士学位，并于2008年加入杨百翰大学，并任职于韩国、中国、东亚及世界历史课程。Larson 博士著有多本学术著作，其中包括《传统、条约和贸易》、《新帝国主义和朝鲜》。Larson 博士关注各种当代问题，包括但不限于东亚各国外交关系、中韩关系。他曾在 ABC、MSNBC、美国之声、加拿大广播系统和半岛电视台分享其观点。
Let's give it up for Dr. Larson.
有请。
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here with so many people that are willing to give up a Saturday to think and learn and discuss more about two nations and peoples dear and near to my heart, the United States and China. What I want to do today is discuss perhaps a slightly different way to understand the history of relations between China and the United States. That is a bit different from much of what we see in the current headlines. You don't have to pay much attention to current news reports and headlines and social media before you encounter words like competition, new Cold War, decoupling, conflict, and perhaps even worse. And I don't want to downplay the significance of the current moment or the geopolitical, commercial, and cultural differences that underpin them. But I do want to maybe paint a little picture of China and the United States and the relations, with an emphasis on the 19th century and the impact of China on the United States. That again, I think maybe will help us understand these two great nations and civilizations and peoples in a slightly different way. And here I have sort of two overarching themes. The first is, as is what is said by the preacher in Ecclesiastes 1:9, there's nothing new under the sun. That much of what we see today is reported on in breathless terms of being unprecedented, completely new. But in many cases, this simply is not the case. The second theme is the fact that China and the United States have been intertwined, indeed, I might argue, interdependent since the very beginning of the United States. That this is an abiding feature of the histories of both places. And here I want to draw a little bit on an interesting set of Chinese stories about some early culture heroes, Wuxi and Nuwa. These were beings that introduced many of the basic elements of civilization to people in China. And there have been various stories and narratives about them told ever since. And in many cases, Fuxi or Nuwa are depicted as discrete individuals, but more often they're depicted together. A married couple whose bodies are literally intertwined. And I think this is a good way to think about China and the United States. So I want to start with something that everyone's aware of, the remarkable story of China's economic rise in the last 30 years. From the beginning with Deng Xiaoping's liberalizing reforms of the late 1970s up till today, China's economy has grown, its GDP has doubled and then doubled again and then doubled again, and the results are just astounding. More than 2 times the entire population of the United States have been lifted out of poverty into something closer to a middle-class existence. And again, parts of this story are indeed unprecedented, especially the speed at which this economic transformation has taken place. And those of us that have watched China for decades and traveled to China time and time again can see the literal transformation of Shanghai in a decade, from this to that. Remarkable transformation. In global terms, this means that the size of the Chinese economy has long since surpassed Japan to be the second largest economy in the world, and many predict that it will soon overtake the United States to be the largest economy in the world. And in terms of commercial interactions between the United States and China, this has meant that there is a significant trade deficit from the perspective of the United States. The United States buys far more goods from China than it sells to China. And China makes one of the largest, the single largest proportion of any trade deficit experienced by the United States today. So again, much of this is significant. Some of it is unprecedented, but maybe not quite as unprecedented as we might think. I dare say that if an extraterrestrial visitor to Earth were to come any time in the last 2,000 years and survey the Earth and say, where is the largest, most productive economy that enjoys trade surpluses with most of its neighbors, the answer has been China. And the only case where this has not been the case is really from the middle of the 19th century up until about the middle or third quarter of the 20th century. And so the norm is the centrality of China's economy in the world. The anomaly is the brief moment when the United States is rising to power. And so again, I think it's important to sort of look at these things in a larger perspective and realize that maybe the challenges that are being recognized today are not quite as new or unexpected or unprecedented as we might think. Westerners were aware of the centrality of the Chinese economy. Hence their attempts to approach China in various ways and buy all sorts of desired Chinese goods. In recent centuries, most significantly in the so-called Canton trade, the city of Guangzhou in southern China. And Americans were among these Westerners that approached China. And for various reasons, an very interesting character during this period, Wu Bingjian, known more often in the English language literature and to his American friends as Hokwa, he was probably the wealthiest man in the world in the early 19th century. And he had far-flung resources and trade networks that extended across Asia, Southeast Asia, and so on. And for interesting reasons, he took a real liking to Americans. And so when Americans first approached Canton, many of them became friends with Hokwa. They embarked in businesses together. And being a good capitalist, Hokwa sent some of his capital with his American friends back to the fledgling United States to invest here. One of these friends is John Murray Forbes, a Boston Brahmin who got a lot of his wealth from the China trade. And Hokwa entrusted with him a lot of Hokwa's own capital and said, take it to the United States and invest it where you see fit. And Forbes did invest it, in many cases very but among other things, in some of the United States' first railroads, and especially railroads that link the East Coast to Chicago. But without Chinese capital, we don't have one of the most formative early stories of American expansion. Forbes was also able to parlay the fortunes that he and Hokwa made together into social and political capital and create a very powerful and successful clan, among whose descendants can be counted John Forbes Carey. That's where the Forbes comes from. He was one-time U.S. Senator, Secretary of State, presidential hopeful. Another gentleman that had extensive dealings with Hokwa is Abel Abbott Lowe. And he too took the money that he earned working with Hokwa and invested in a variety of ways. One was to create what was then one of the largest fleets of merchant ships of any American company. And what did he name the flagship of this fleet? He named it the Hokwa. And he knew where the money came from. But also he invested in what was the first transatlantic submarine telegraph cable. And so the very elements of technology that Americans and other Westerners sought to reintroduce to China in the late 19th century probably would not have existed but for the relationship with China. Other merchants became wealthy because of the China trade, maybe not necessarily dealing directly with Hokwa. One is this gentleman, Ralph Waldo. Oh, excuse me, before I get to that. Lowe also basically bankrolled Emerson. We don't have one of the most influential cases of American philosophizing, but for Chinese capital. And Emerson recognized this. He recognized Confucius as one of the world's 13 greatest thinkers, and looked forward to a day in which he anticipated seeing what he called the union of the farthest east and the farthest west, the United States and China working together for mutual common interests. Here's another merchant, Warren Delano Jr. Sadly, he made most of his money in the China trade smuggling opium. Americans were second only to the British in the infamous opium trade of the early 19th century. But like Forbes, he was able to parlay his wealth into social and political capital. And if you're wondering where you've heard the name Warren Delano before, that's because his grandson is Franklin Delano Roosevelt, longest serving American president in US history. Other American presidents have been influenced by the relationship with China. Herbert Hoover spent time in China as a mining engineer, and he and his wife would speak Mandarin to each other in the White House when they wanted to have private conversations that no one else could eavesdrop in on. Not a president, but a very influential figure in the 20th century, Henry Luce, the publisher, born in China, spent his early formative years there, and it's no accident that some of his most influential publications, Time magazine, Life magazine, consistently covered and featured and was interested in China. So all of this is to say that, again, we can't tell the stories of either China or the United States as separate. They have been intertwined from the beginning, for better or for worse. This is also true in one of the most significant narratives in American history, which is the narrative of westward expansion. Now, this has a million different sub-stories and participants and so on, but arguably one of the motivations for acquiring more territory and linking that territory by canals and railroads and other things is to get better access to China. Certainly wasn't the only motivation, but it was a significant one. And here too, China figures more prominently in this narrative than many Americans might initially recognize. Take, for instance, the iconic mountain man, the fur trappers who explored and connected, in many cases, territory that eventually becomes the United States. Where did most of the fur acquired by these fur trappers end up? Actually, China, where it lined the robes of elites' costumes, and in some cases, outright just fur was a huge fashion element in 18th and 19th century China. And this iconic thing that many Americans associate with US history doesn't exist but for, again, the interrelations with China. I should note here that almost the exact same time that the United States is expanding westward, with all of its problematic aspects of interacting with indigenous peoples and the variety of strategies and tactics that the United States used, military force, colonization, in some cases taking advantage of disease that ravages native populations, settlements, and so on. China was actually doing the exact same thing, moving west, using military force, colonization, settlements, and in many cases, the story of these two great empires is again, much closer to each other than we might initially recognize. Many Americans might not have been familiar with how significant the role of Chinese capital was in early American railroad construction, but many more are familiar with the fact that you don't have the Transcontinental Railroad, another large railroad project of the mid to late 19th century, without huge amounts of Chinese labor. But for Chinese workers, again, these iconic elements in American history simply do not exist. But sadly, as is indicative of many cases in US history, despite the central role played by Chinese laborers in the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad, when it came time to pound in the golden spike and celebrate the completion of this, Chinese are nowhere to be seen. Not a single Chinese person in this iconic photograph. And this too is sadly emblematic of a larger set of processes that take place in the 19th century, in which the United States starts to really grapple with, for the first time, having a formal immigration policy, and among other things, establishes the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which is the first piece of American legislation aimed at restricting the immigration of one particular ethnic group, in this case, the Chinese. And much to America's shame, this remains on the books all the way until World War II. And then Americans legally and extra-legally took all sorts of measures to try to oppress, marginalize, and eliminate the very workers and migrants that they once welcomed in many horrific and violent ways. But Chinese and Chinese Americans did not take this sitting down. They responded with a variety of tactics, including boycotts and strikes, letter writing campaigns, attempts to influence legislation, and initiation and participation in a number of landmark civil proceedings, court proceedings, which have paved the way for the corpus of American civil rights law and practice. Give you a couple of, I forgot this really interesting thing. In recent years, the American immigration debate has focused on the threat of immigration across its southern border, mostly coming from Mexico and Central America. But actually, the first U.S. proposal to build the wall along the southern border was aimed not at Mexicans, but at Chinese. And so here we have the El Paso Herald-Post in 1904 declaring that if this Chinese immigration to Mexico continues, it will be necessary to run a barbed wire fence along our side of the Rio Grande. Again, the intertwinement is unavoidable. As is the brave and far-seeing efforts of Chinese Americans to encourage the United States to live up to its lofty ideals of equality. And so you have, for example, the court proceeding in 1884 that was the first time where non-European Americans were actually given the right to testify in court, or that was not allowed. Or the case in 1898 that established the bedrock principle of birthright citizenship, again initiated by Chinese. And so we can't talk about the history of the expansion of civil rights in the United States without talking about China. One final element in the 19th century, as the United States did expand from sea to shining sea and then continued to expand across the Pacific, it joined with other Western imperialists wanting to advance their interests in China. But the United States chose to depict its interests and its tactics a bit differently. It said, in contrast to the British and the French and the Russians and others who wanted to actually annex pieces of China, to carve up the China melon, the United States advocated what it called the open door policy. The idea that everyone should get equal access to China and its markets, and there shouldn't be areas of exclusive privilege. Now, the United States did not always live up to even its own open door ideals, but I think many argue that the establishment of an international system of free trade governed by rules and equal access becomes a bedrock principle of American foreign policy, in part because of its experience in advocating for the open door in China, and that things like the General Agreements on Tariffs and Trade that was enacted soon after World War II, or its more recent successor, the World Trade Organization, owe much of their existence and their enthusiastic backing by the United States because of this interaction with China. So these are all ways in the 19th century, particularly, that the United States and China have been more intertwined than we might recognize, and that in many cases there really is nothing new under the sun. I want to end with just one more recent example that many have paid attention to, and that's the role of the interaction between the United States and China in film. There have been any number of stories about how the power of the China market, but also the official acts of Chinese government has actually influenced the types of movies that are made by Hollywood in the United States, or particular coverage of particular issues. And a couple of examples. One, for reasons entirely unclear to me, someone thought it good to remake the Cold War classic Red Dawn. When it came out in the Cold War, the invaders of the United States were the Soviets and the Cubans, but they wanted to update this version, and so initially the invaders of the United States were going to be Chinese. But there was so much fear about Chinese backlash and the fact that anyone that worked on this film might be blackballed and boycotted from participating in any China activity, that the filmmakers went in frame by frame and eliminated anything that pointed to the invaders being from China and replaced them with the entirely plausible North Korea. And so suddenly we have heroic Americans defending themselves against the North Korean invasion. Another example, more recently, is the iconic cult classic Fight Club that ends with Project Mayhem resulting in bombs blowing up buildings in a unnamed American city. The version that's screened in China actually changes the ending and ends with this interesting little note. Through the clue provided by Tyler, the police rapidly figured out the whole plan and arrested all the criminals, successfully preventing the bomb from exploding. And after the trial, Tyler was sent to the lunatic asylum receiving psychological treatment. He was discharged from the hospital in 2012. Much better ending, maybe. A lot of hand-wringing about this type of thing, and acknowledging, acknowledging the significant power that China seems to wield over even American culture in a way that maybe it didn't before, or did it? Let's go back a century. In a time when China was not a global superpower, in which the United States and China were not particularly close allies, and yet you have, for example, the Frank Capra picture, the bitter tea of General Yen. Chinese students in the United States, but also Chinese diplomats, protested the coverage of China. They said this is inaccurate, this makes China look worse than it really is. And their efforts eventually resulted in a prologue being put before the movie, just like that Fight Club ending statement, which declared that this picture represents a mere literary fantasy and does not in any way pretend to depict actual conditions of real life in China. 3 years later, Paramount Studios announced to China that basically we will not produce any films that you don't like. So again, I hope that we can sort of take a step back from some of the breathless coverage of the challenges, which are very real, in relations between China and the United States, and recognize not only that in many cases there is nothing new under the sun, but also that for better or for worse, China and the United States are intertwined. They are interdependent. And I hope that recognition of this can maybe help us devise new ways of thinking about our relations and new solutions moving forward. Thank you very much.
Our second speaker will be Dr. Zhihong Yi.
接下来，我们有请中国人民大学易志宏博士为我们演讲。
Dr. Yi is currently a professor of finance and the academic director of the FinTech MBA program at the Renmin University of China. She previously served as the vice president for international affairs and alumni relationship development, the dean of the business school at Renmin University, the board member of EFMD, and the IAC member of the AACSB. She actively participated in the founding of Global Network for Advanced Management with Yale and the IE Business School in 2012.
易志宏博士现任中国人民大学商学院金融学教授，金融科技 MBA 项目学术主任。易教授曾任中国人民大学国际事务及校友关系发展副主任、商学院院长，并于2012至2021年之间担任 EFMD 董事会成员。同时也在2012至2017年期间担任 AACSB IAC 委员会成员。在2012年，易志宏博士曾积极参与耶鲁大学管理学院和商学院共同创建的全球高级管理网络。
Please join us in welcoming Dr. Yi.
有请易博士。
Okay, so I thought I was the speaker after the break, so I still have a few minutes break. So I don't realize that this is my second. So good morning, everyone. It is really a great honor and pleasure for me to attend the BYU China Conference and talk about the topic of fintech. So. I know there's a few days there's a big news happened here in the United States. I don't know how many people have you heard about the Silicon Bank go bankrupt. So this is about finance, and this is also about technology. So I realized when I try to talk about the fintech, finance plus technology, it's a little bit risky topic. I don't know how many of you in the audience have the background of finance. So could you please just raise your hand? This seems not that many. Is that because this is BYU? But I do believe in the audience, almost everyone have some kind of connection with finance, either in your life or in your work. And no matter whether you like it or you hate it. So I'm going to talk about the topic of the development of a fintech in China. So let me see. Before I talk about the development of a fintech, so let's just have a rough idea about what is a fintech. What is fintech? So now, so can I ask you a question? Here's the question: does fintech equal to finance plus technology? That's the question. So can I ask you to vote for the answer? So how many people will say yes? Okay. And how many of you will say no? It's a little bit, the yes answer seems a little bit more than answer no. So what about my answer? My answer would be yes and no. Okay, so here I put two examples of technology in finance. So I think all of you are very familiar with this ATM, which is introduced back into early 1960 by Barclays Bank. Another one is a mobile bank more recently, but it's first introduced from Norway from 1999. So these are technologies in the finance. But I didn't say it's a fintech. So what about a fintech? So just give you the definition or explanation by the Financial Stability Board in 2016. So fintech is technology-enabled innovation in financial services that could result in new business models, applications, processes, or products with an associated material effect on the provision of financial services. So I think when we talk the technology in the finance, it's not the new phenomena. It's not the recent phenomena. So when we look at the history of financial development, we always witness the kind of technology application in the finance. So about what is different of this time, this waves of a fintech. So we even create a norm, a term, fintech. So what is the different? I will give you maybe 3 or 4 differences about the fintech. What is fintech? So first, fintech is driven by technology company, by technology startups. So I put several names of fintech startups here. I know some of you may be familiar with some of these names, like Lending Club, PayPal, On Deck. They are from the United States, and TransferWise and Atom are from the UK, and also Alipay from China. So this is not a traditional financial institution. This is a technology company. And second one, so those technology companies, they started to provide the financial services products. So we call they provide alternative finance. So we've been seeing in the past decades with the technology, all kinds of technology emerging, so including artificial intelligence, big data, blockchain, and cloud computing, deep learning. So we typically say ABCD technology. This is constantly emerging. All different kinds of technology constantly emerging, and like the same. And this technology-enabled alternative finance also constantly emerging. So from peer-to-peer lending to mobile payment, money transfer, wealth management, and insurance tech, and even regulation tech. So it's still continually emerging. So here's I put some name of so-called disruptive fintech companies. Disruptive fintech company is picked out by CNBC 2022. Some of the names you may familiar or know about, and but I know there are also some names that attract a very controversial, lots of debate, like Robinhood. So some like Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger has a really furious criticize on this Robinhood. So unlike the traditional stock market transaction, so the Robinhood provide a platform for just ordinary people with a small money. You can do investment in the stock market. So there's also other alternative and also disruptive financial services products here. Embedded finance, startup loans, etc. And the third one, when we talk about the fintech, it's a rapid expansion around the world. So fintech not only appeared in the UK, United States, and also it also appeared in other countries in Europe, Middle East and Africa, and of course in the Asia and Australia. So actually it appears everywhere. So it's a very rapid expansion. So the last one when we talk about the fintech is we shouldn't ignore the attitude or responding of the incumbent financial institutions. So here, I don't know, are you familiar with this guy? Yes, this is Damon from. So for the traditional financial institutions, they are firstly responding to the fintech is kind of resist. It's kind of a resist. And then a few years later, they realized this is just a trend, the future trend. So then they changed their attitude to embracing fintech. And so they started to accelerate their pace of digital transmission. So all these premiers, top tiers, the financial institutions, they start to accelerate their pace of digital transformation. So in terms of a strategy and their organizational structure and also strategic actions and steps. So let's then move to what's happened in China in terms of fintech. So when we talk about the fintech development in China, I should say, to be frank, there's a bright side and also dark side. So we have a good experience, and we also have a lot of lessons. So here I just mentioned several very important things in the process. The first one is P2P. So I don't know, because I see several Chinese students here, so I don't know if are familiar with this P2P platform. P2P, peer-to-peer lending platform, firstly appeared around 2004 or 2005 in UK and the United States. Then 2 years later, in 2007, it appeared, the first P2P platform appeared in China. The name is Pai Pai Dai. So one of my colleagues once wrote the case of Pai Pai Dai. So it took a few years for the venture capital to pull in to the P2P sector. So here we can say around 2013, so with so much venture capital just rushed into this sector. And then P2P platform experienced the booming. So at its peak around 2015, 2016, there are about more than 6,000 P2P platform. As the cases of fraud and consumer rights and the interests violating happened, so the regulatory authorities began to step in. So at the beginning, the regulatory authority didn't want to let them disappear. So the policy is gradually to more and more strict, but they found it's very hard to pick among those group of the apples, which one is a good apples, which one is bad apples. It's very difficult to recognize. So unfortunately, at the end of 2020, all the P2P platform were cleared, so disappeared. So zero platform exists. So P2P, this was the first wave of fintech in China. So at that time, we don't call this a fintech. We call it internet finance. Internet finance. So this P2P platform really gave us a huge lessons. And also, I should say, the society also pay a huge cost for this P2P. A lot of people lost their money, their investment. Another thing I want to highlight is fintech platform emergence. Those fintech platforms were established by those technology giants like Alibaba Group and Tencent, Baidu, and so on. So those technology giants established their own fintech platforms. It's not a phenomenon here and other developed countries, but that's in China. The reason behind that is because there are huge gap between the financial demand and the financial services providing. So huge demand. So there are so much opportunities. So all these technology giants, they just took the advantage of their online shopping, social media, and the searching. So they try to embed all these opportunities internally. So when we look at the 2017, 2019, the top 10, top 100 global fintech companies. We'll say about 5 Chinese companies here and 4 Chinese companies respectively. So that's fintech platform giants. So when we talk about the fintech giants platform, and one thing I shouldn't ignore, so that's mobile payment and the cashless society. So everybody, when you go to China, you will find it's easily pay by either by Alipay or WeChat Pay, or even in the street corner, in the vendor stand, even for the market, farmer market goods, you can pay by this mobile pay. So people are talking about China might be the first country to enter into their kind of society without cashless society. So totally, we have more than 900 million mobile payment users. Another thing, when we talk about the fintech development in China, we also couldn't ignore is also like what had happened in other countries in banking sectors. It's Chinese bank system. They also accelerated their pace of go digital. So here's on the right end is the whole banking system, whole Chinese banking system. So on the top of the is those 5 big, very big state-owned banks. And the second one is we call joint stock bank. So when we look at this bank's reaction to the fintech, we will say those joint stock banks are much more aggressive. So they are pioneers, really pioneers. So let's see. Sorry, I just put the China Merchant Bank. Sorry, more say there. It's 中国招商银行 China Merchant Bank, and also Ping An 银行 Ping An Group. So those are pioneers. And then all the other big state-owned banks, they are closely try to follow that pace. So we say all these big banks also jump in to accelerate their digital transformation. Okay, so they took all different kinds of strategic actions, like they set up their own fintech. These big banks, they set up their own fintech subsidiaries, and also try to establish the strategic collaboration with the fintech giants, and also they substantially increase their fintech investment, and also restructure their business and IT department, organizational structure, so on and so on. So so when we look at these 2 graphs, that shows how fintech grows in China rapidly. So on the left side is about the global increase, fintech investment increase from 2013 to 2018. So totally, the investment in fintech is about 6 times. But the right hand is the fintech investment increase in China. So if we include the Ant Group deal in 2018, so the increase will be 159 times. So that is 2018, the Ant deal is the biggest deal in the world. But if we exclude that deal, So still the increase rate is still 27 times. So it's much more rapid than the average global investment increase. Then about the fintech development in China, so there's one thing, a particular thing I want to highlight is the fintech development plan, which is a kind of unique to the other Western countries are not very familiar with this kind of things. So in after watching and witnessing the fintech development, the central bank, the People's Bank of China, issued its first fintech development plan in 2019 for 3 years. And then in 2022, they launched a second plans for another few years. So in these plans, the central bank confirmed the fintech's positive role, which is very important it's a very important sign for either the banking sector or fintech companies. They say the central bank say the fintech has played a very positive role because it's a debating issue. And then they plan also set up the top level plannings and also define the future development goals like the fintech governance, the data issue, infrastructure, and whole technology, etc., etc. So that is very important for the development, the future development for the whole sector of a fintech. So that's a kind of a Chinese way of the government how to guide kind of an innovative thing. Okay, then the last question. So through all this process of fintech development, what kind of license we have learned? What kind of license? Because fintech is very new. It's very new. It's still in when we take a look at of the global development of a fintech, it's only about 10 years, a little bit more than 10 years. So fintech is still in their stage of infancy, babyhood. So we're still not very sure about the fintech's function. It's a benefit or it's a risk. It's a risk. So there's still lots of argument debating. So for in the process of fintech development, we have seen lots of a challenge between the how to inspire financial innovation and in the meantime how to keep financial stability. This is a very difficult problem, a difficult task. So those fintech we have seen in the early years, when the regulatory authority didn't step in, so it's actually absent of no regulation, no supervision. So in Chinese we say 野蛮生长, wild growth of the fintech, 野蛮生长. And then we also, with the fintech platforms involved in a variety of financial business, like Ant Group. So a lot of people know the Ant Group just stopped right before their IPO. So this fintech platform also raised a lot of concern about their mixed operation of platform, and also concern about the monopoly of the platform. And then also when the traditional financial institutions like a bank, security, companies, they started embrace their new technology. They also break through some current regulatory requirement. So like some here, just put. We say when facing so much challenges on the fintech, so not only we will not only say the financial product, financial services innovation, but we've also realized our regulatory framework and the regulatory approach for the financial sectors also need innovation. So our regulatory framework started to introduce some concept of behavioral regulation, which is pay more attention on the consumer's rights. So like data privacy, so those kind of financial consumers' right and interests. We also started introduce the concept of a functional relation. It's much more U.S. regulatory framework, functional. That means no matter you are incumbent financial institutions or you are new technology companies, as long as you provide financial services or products, you have to be under the supervision of the regulatory authority. So we started to do that in our current institutional regulatory framework. And also Chinese government also do something innovation on the fintech supervision approach. So we introduced the fintech pilot project. Pilot in Chinese we say 试点 pilot. So that's a kind of methodology when China implement open door policy. We started first in the Shenzhen or other areas we call 试点 or 特区. So that's the regulatory approach on fintech company. So we can let you do, but you have to be under the supervision. So initiated in 2019 in Beijing, and then other big cities, Shanghai, Guangzhou, Shenzhen, etc., also started to implement those kind of pilot project. So actually, it's pretty much like the UK's regulatory sandbox. You can play the game. You are allowed, those technology companies, you are allowed to play the games, but you have to in the sandbox. So this is, that means the risk is controllable. It's controllable. Okay, so that's some of the very important things happened in China in the fintech development process. So I want to finish my speech by quote Professor Christensen's saying that Professor Christensen also BYU alumni, and it's famous. He's a respected scholar and famous for its disruptive innovation theory. So because we say the fintech is still in its infancy, so it's not mature. So there are lots of things is still in uncertainty. So we are not that sure if it is good or it is bad. The risk, the benefit, we're still not that much sure. So, but how do we think about the future of a fintech, either globally or in China? We should think about the Christensen's saying, if there's a job to be done, so there will be the technology to step in. So if the incumbent financial institutions cannot provide the product or services, the other parties will step in to provide this. So I think I'm relatively optimistic for the future of a fintech, either globally or in China. Okay, thank you very much.
We apologize for a conflict with the schedule listed in the pamphlet. For the information of the audience and speakers, Dr. Kang is now the third speaker in the schedule. The rest of the conference will proceed as printed.
在这里，我们就未能提前告知对会议流程做出的调整，向各位演讲者和与会者进行道歉。在短暂的休息过后，我们将欢迎康长云博士为我们演讲，后续会议流程将按行程单的流程进行。
We will now have a 10-minute intermission. We ask everyone to please return to their seats by 11:20. Thank you.
我们将进行短暂的休整，在10分钟过后，11点20分，请大家准时就座，谢谢。
We'd like to remind everybody that on the back of your programs is a QR code. Feel free to scan it and submit questions throughout the conference. These questions will be addressed by speakers in our panel session after lunch.
我们在此再次提醒大家，请通过议程背后的2维码，积极提交相关问题。这些问题将由我们的演讲者最后在我们的座谈会中回答。
Our third speaker will be Dr. Changyan Kang.
我们的第3位演讲者是北京师范大学中国教育创新研究院副院长康长运博士，不好意思。
Dr. Kang is a cross-cultural educator and an active promoter for education innovation, as well as the internationalization of education and classic Chinese education. Currently, he is serving as the Associate Dean at Beijing Normal University China Education Innovation Institute, the key host for China Education Innovation Welfare Exposition sponsored by BNU. At the present, Dr. Kang commits himself to the research in bridging the Western culture and educational research with classic Chinese wisdom, as well as current school practices, especially Confucian philosophy. Apart from his intensive academic research, Dr. Kang has dynamic interaction with industry, particularly with K-12 education. Drawn upon his profound experience in hands-on science education research, Dr. Kang highly advocates education innovation, including STEAM philosophy, and supports the pursuit to better serve the future education of the children in China.
康长运博士曾任北京师范大学基础教育课程研究中心副主任、北京大学科学教育研究中心常务副主任和新世纪版国际基础教育课程标准总编辑委员会副主任。康博士也是第8次全国基础教育课程改革的组织协调者，国家科学质量标准2049项目协调者和教育部做中学科普教育项目的联络者。康长运博士亦独立承担一系列重大国家科研项目。
Please join us in welcoming Dr. Kang to the stage.
有请康博士。
Although a little bit nervous, but although the break, I see the scenario very warmly. I just imagine if today's world, today's US and China like this kind of very warm scenario, the picture, how we happy today. I'm Kang Changyun. I'm very honored to be here. In a very special very historical moment in the world, particularly in U.S. and China relationship. A little bit crazy, right? So in the moment, BYU still co-sponsor the China Conference. That would make a very special feeling in the heart. When I get the invitation from Peter, I just say, God, Peter, are you sure you are right? You are not got wrong? Peter said, exactly. You know, we BYU people, we are the most tolerant people in the world. I mean, oh, okay. You know, at my home, my son, my wife is here in the meeting. They never, tolerate my English. Thank you for you can bet on my very heavy Chinese accent English. But after all, it's a China conference today, right? Okay. You see the title. I just want to argue today in the special moment as an educator. We are not like the politician, like Council Wang. As an educator in the special moment, what kind of stuff we can do, what kind of efforts we can make. And today in the following half hour, I try to weave in 5 stories between China, US, between BYU and BNU. And next. Oh, sorry. Yes, this is my university, Beijing Normal University. Some colleague ask you, what's normal? Normal means not abnormal. Definitely a joke. Normal means we have the same cause, same commitment to the future. Normal means teacher education. So my university is a normal university, means we are teacher education university. Now boasting, it's quite top in China, maybe top 1. Just in this campus, you can see the series of pictures. We can witness in the past century, our university, undergone a big transforming, a big change, dynamic change. This is our current, quite modern, right? Quite modern buildings. And the first one, second one, third one, maybe this one is in 1990 when I was a master's degree in BYU campus. The first 2 one is probably 1 century ago. In this campus, we welcome great American educator John Dewey. Do you know the big educator? John Dewey from Columbia. He is a great mentor to promote China education from tradition to modernization. And today's our speech also from here. From the same campus, John Dewey, after several years, John Dewey visited BNU campus. Another great man, great educator and apostle from BYU, our great Elder McKay, also in 1921, he visited the same campus. The great man, he visited Wartime, China. He went to the Forbidden City, the Heaven Altar. He make a very dedicatory prayer for Chinese people, particularly for Chinese kids. And just there, it's a 5 story. Just you very, Telegram link language to try to cut time short. The great man make at the place. I just imagine he made invasion there will be a university, there will be a place can hold the kids from all different cultural background can learn and study together, can work together for the better world. Today, when we see the picture, can we make a flexing, a moment? I mean, see, he think over his prophetic promise. Prophetic promise is that the men and the women will go in the campus whose influence will be felt for good towards the establishment of peace internationally. Let us think about today, right now, how far we are from his prophetic promise today. As an educator, what we can do for the vision of our mutual vision and mission. Another great BYU person, relevant. You know, everybody, you are familiar, definitely familiar like me. It's a joke. Yesterday, before I come, I shared the 5 story to my former dean from UPC, Professor Robert Tierney. He comments that your story is right. It's really touching. But how your English in half hour can make clear the 5 story? I mean, most audience, most listeners, they more clear than myself. The great lady in 1930s. Definitely, it's different with today's peaceful. Although Lady Korea is still peaceful, he went to China. He to Yan'an. He dedicated her more than 10 years, more than a decade, life to try to understand China, understand the Yan'an, the special, the new party. Although, today, the people criticize her, some people, definitely not BYU people. He's no critical thinking to support CCP, support China. I mean, he dedicated 1 decade life to do that. He used his critical mind. He used his eye to understand China. How about you? Okay. Today, I know BYU, there is a special master degree course, special study on China-US relationship from the life of the great lady, great woman. We should think about what kind of lesson we should pass on to our new generations, to the young listeners today. Above all, two story is 2 big figures. Today, I would like to share a young man, not a very young, it's like me. Peter, my friend Peter, your colleagues. Definitely, you are more familiar to him than me. I mean, that's Peter. Although yesterday, even very late last night, he gave me a message, come, please not mention me too much. I mean, I try, but it's very difficult. The young man, he was born and grew in Hong Kong. And he has his master's degree, PhD degree in BYU campus. During his, in 1990s, during his master's degree, he tried to follow the McKay step, to go to China, to extend his love to China, the Chinese people. He integrate his research, link to Chinese scholars. And I should say, he's a very dedicated network builder. In the 2 photos, you can know the former president, Professor Dong Qi, is famous psychologist and educator. The Professor Lin Chongde, it's very famous, almost a top 1, 2. And Professor Xin Jiliang, also the young man, second one. He's currently a very high levels professor and administrator in China Ministry of Education. That time, when Peter, tried to, collaborate with him, he's a very young professor. But Peter only a master student, PhD candidate, but they built very long-term, in-depth, long-term collaboration, research collaboration. And they do a network and do the exchange, promote a lot of faculty levels collaboration with BNU. I mean, Peter is not, it's a real story. Peter is very popular in BNU campus. One day we just walked at the BNU campus. A lot of people say hello to Peter. Even more people, even more than me, more than me. A lot of people have thought, oh, Peter, he's a colleague from BNU. I mean, no, definitely. You could not find his name in the pay list. No. But he really do great jobs. You can find that he make a lot of famous BNU professor, and even beyond the school, he conducted a very good research, with the support, definitely, with a lot of professors, a lot of deans, faculty levels, support. He promote the action research, use a very, it's a very, for me hard to pronounce, oceanographical methodology in 1990s. And creating the video and the graphic for training Chinese teachers. The China, BNU is the teacher education university, a top 1 in China. They do this kind of job. In 1990s, action research for Chinese academic circle is not popular. Not too many people, even scholar professors, do not know much about action research, particularly like CD-ROM, like technology integrated education to like oceanography or teacher training. They do great jobs. Right now, it's very popular. It can be called the BYU model in China. It's regarded as the very important theory and research methodology in China now. And Peter also dedicated to promote the BNU to BYU co-sponsor a series conference. You can notice that in 2000, 2002, 4, 6, 8, even right now, ongoing in teacher education and even in psychological counseling area. It's such great jobs. So we witness that McKay and Highlands, that they are still at presence. They still alive. The BYU spirits of why. Here I would like to the fourth story. I would like to introduce another young man. It's my colleague and also my leader, Professor Liu Jian. You know that he's the dean of China in the Education Innovation Institute. It's my working unit. The institute I would like to share. It's very young. It's established in 2014. It's just a response to the President Xi, the visit to BNU campus in 2014. And when he promoted the BNU people to do the education innovation, in the second year, we established the institute. And then we work with Professor Liu Jian to dedicated to promote China education innovation and beyond China. Later I will little bit detail. And Professor Liu Jian is a colleague from BNU. as also graduate from BYU from bachelor degree, and his background is mathematics education, and the young man in the end of the last century, the China Minister of Education, we launched the 8th round, so-called curriculum, national levels curriculum reform. I just wonder, what's the conception about the Chinese education in your mind? Actually, yes, we do, such a, the big country, the developing country with such a, high population of kids, we do a lot of problems. We face more problems should be than your Americans. We have the exam-oriented, rote learning style, but we try to change that. Even since the end of last century, we try to promote our exam-oriented, exam-driven education to quality education. Right now, we call, like you pace, we call competency education, just like you. The guy, his professional life, his research project can, very reflect the dynamic transformation, the dynamic, development in Chinese education. And when in the Expo, the China Innovation Expo is launched by Beijing University, actually organized and led by the professor, the young professor. So when Yao Ding and the professor, our Ding, the two great men, their hands work together, we can imagine a lot of stories will happen, just more than 5 stories. I would like, through a little bit his research, our research project to showcase, what we are doing, what kind of connection with American colleagues, with BYU colleagues. I mentioned that we are promote the core competency education. And even several years, Professor Liu Jian leading our team to develop the core competency report for the very famous international organization, WISE, the World Education Summit, to generalized more than 20 countries, their competency education practice. Then we work with American colleague, P21, the famous organization. They promote the 4C competency models. 4C means communication, critical thinking, collaboration, and credibility. When I met the team in BYU campus, we just worked together, formulated a new team. We developed so kind of 5Cs models. 5C, in the models, we put culture stuff, culture competency, culture understanding and heritage in the center of the other 4Cs. The culture is not Chinese culture, not only Chinese culture, or not only traditional culture. It's a kind of your culture, our culture. It's a cross culture. We treasure our own culture. We also open mind to learn from other, understand other cultures. That's our model. It's very popular. We have the report in Chinese and in English. I would like to share with you all who are interested. And the Professor Liu Jian is chief editor of one of the most popular textbook for grade 1 to 6 in China. Very popular. What kind of popular? More than at least almost half of all Chinese 1 to 6 kids use the textbook, the math textbook. That's not enough. particularly the very famous top publishing house, Pearson Education, you know that. They work with him. The team joined the Pearson team. They generate a new version of our math textbook. You can check on the web. And the textbook is appointed to one of two UKs by the UK Minister of Education to promote to UK's 1 to 6 schools, 1 to 6 kids, and even a lot of not limited in UK. A lot of countries use the textbook. I just want to say, through the project, we can say, through education, through our professional research project, our research outcome, we are, move together. We can share, we can, better understanding and collaboration, generate high quality education products for kids, for future. It's a kind of China Education Innovation Expo, and in China. It's right now, it's one of the most popular, most important expo in China. The kind of expo, just like, today our, hall is very huge, but compared with the expo, we are very small. We have more than 30,000 square meters, very big hall, and more than the fifth expo, the Yamahan team, faculty level team, a lot of colleagues, a lot of even the education innovation items project gathered, assembled in the expo. More than one in the fifth innovation expo, more than 2,000 of education innovation project from Chinese school, beyond Chinese school, even from America, from more than 20 countries to do the exhibition and forum, the conference. So that's, I just wonder what's the time? Over? 1分钟，还5分钟可以吗 ？OK。OK. Sorry. Last story. The story also familiar, just in your campus last year. Our former ambassador, Qin. Right now, he's a minister of, our foreign affairs. He visited the campus, like Control 1 today, and he met the first delegation of young ambassador from BYU. The scenario is very touching. After, it's BYU, the university, since the first young ambassador delegation to China, through their very fantastic show, their performance to Chinese people, make all Chinese people know BYU, know America, know American culture. And I said that after 40 years, the first delegation of young ambassador, they are getting older. Their hair from very black to gray to high, even to bald, right? But when young generations, generation by generations, the young ambassador, they are growing up. They follow their step to China to extend their love to Chinese people. In another direction, I'm coming again. We come back. So just I I saw the videos, the leaders of the performance leaders in the first delegation, and he said that no matter how crazy today, the tie, the friendship between Chinese and American peoples will never, never go down. And I'm very happy that our ambassador last year he visited the BYU again. After his visit, a lot of new story happened. You can see that it's BYU and BYU a kind of a contract ongoing. I believe so. It's the ambassador promote Minister of Education, promote the BYU, Minister MOE, Minister of Education to BYU, to myself. Call me Minister of the Education, call based up the president, call myself. Okay, come, you have your Peter, you BYU, you do great long-term collaboration. Can you create more program like the Chinese language education program? That's it. Contract, basically. Yesterday, I met the director of language education, director Lin, right? You know, she is signed on the contract. So I believe so. Every story will, good story will generate, very beautiful more story. It's my story is actually it's 5 plus 1. It's the last. It's just before I share my story to my former dean, University of British Columbia, Robert Tierney. The professor, actually graduated from America and working in a lot of American universities, then take the deanship in UBC, University of British Columbia, then University of Sydney, and then BYU. We invite him 5 years contract as a honorary professor who working in China. He know I am present. I will present in the conference. On the conference, he just said, "Come, you tell BYU colleagues, encourage them go to China, go to school in Mongolia, go to the elementary school. Chinese actually have been working 5 years in China, part time, not full time. And he go to in Mongolia, in 2019, the young guy with the gray hair, not me. We just work together. I mean, you tell the colleague of BYU, Chinese school, particularly the elementary school, not like a lot of people's stereotype conception. It's very stereocentric. He do many years. I mean, when he comment his last 5 years working experience in China in BYU campus, definitely it's BYU paid. But it's the most invaluable experience, he said, is working in the classroom, in the Chinese classroom. So I know BYU, very proudly on the largest body of international students for practicing. I encourage you, I would join you, work with you, with the whole faculty, with the university. Go China, go to our classroom. Thank you.
Our fourth speaker will be Dr. Robert Griffiths.
我们下一位演讲者是现任杨百翰大学政治系教授、前美国驻上海总领事葛瑞峰博士。
Robert Griffiths was a career U.S. diplomat and the former Consul General of the United States of America in Shanghai. He has served at the American Institute in Kaohsiung, Taipei, Shanghai, and Beijing. He also served as the Senior Program Advisor at the Foreign Service Institute in Arlington, Virginia. In Washington, D.C., he served in the Bureau of Economic and Business Affairs and as Deputy Director of the Southeast Asian Continental Division in the Bureau of East Asian and Pacific Affairs. In addition to the Department of State, he served in the Office of Asian Policy in the Office of the Secretary of Defense and spent a year in the office of Senator Harry Reid of Nevada in the U.S. Senate.
何瑞峰博士曾在高雄、台北、上海和北京的美国研究所任职，并也曾任弗吉尼亚州阿灵顿的外交学院担任高级项目顾问。教授还曾任华盛顿特区经济和商务事务局任职，并担任东亚和太平洋事务局东南亚大陆司副司长。除了在国务院工作外，他还在国防部办公室的亚洲政策办公室任职。何瑞峰教授还曾服务于内华达州参议员 Harry Reid。
Please welcome Dr. Griffiths to the stage.
让我们欢迎葛教授。
王参参，各位来宾，大家好。It's been a long time since I've been able to begin a talk with that, so it's really fun for me to be here. I take down the PowerPoint. Okay. Yeah, I don't have any PowerPoint slides, and so I apologize that the only thing you're going to have to look at during my speech is me. At any rate, when I was a student at BYU and wanted to learn about China, I had to go to Taiwan. I was part of that generation who in the 1960s and 70s learned Chinese from those who had fled the mainland after defeat in the Civil War in 1949. These were people who were proud of their Chinese roots, eager to preserve Chinese culture, and from whom I spent many hours trying to master Chinese calligraphy with a long brush and an inkstone. Life in Taiwan for young foreigners was invigorating and filled with as much fun as you can get riding an underpowered motorcycle with a date on the back. When mainland China began to open up in the 1980s, it was very exciting. Now foreigners could, with a little effort, visit all the places we had read about in the history books. But even greater than the thrill of discovery was the thrill of anticipation. China was changing. What would it become? In the intervening years, incredible things have happened. Hundreds of millions of people have been lifted out of poverty. World-class skyscrapers, high-speed trains, and scores of vast new college campuses dot the land. Vast riches came for some, a materially better off life for nearly all. Interaction with the outside world increased profoundly, and U.S.-China relations were generally good until they were generally not good. But imagine what it would be like today if China and the United States were good friends. What would prospects for world peace be if the two most powerful nations got along well? Some things you might imagine happening would be our two military forces would cooperate to keep rogue states from proliferating weapons of mass destruction or fomenting terrorism. Our military and intelligence agencies would share information to prevent Russia from invading other countries. Our two countries would promote and support each other's candidates for leadership in international organizations. Many millions of tourists and students would travel between and be welcomed by our two countries. Social media platforms developed by either side would be available to people in both China and the United States. Tens of billions of dollars would be invested in each other's economies, creating millions of good jobs. Scientists and other academics from both countries would cooperate in joint research projects which would develop new technologies that benefit the entire world. Our two countries would hold public hearings and publish drafts for comment on important policy issues, and each side would take seriously the suggestions from the other. Could you imagine such a world? Actually, it shouldn't be that hard to imagine, because each of these things that I've just mentioned characterized U.S.-China relations to one degree or another in the 40 years following China's reform and opening in 1978. They do not, unfortunately, characterize U.S.-China relations today, and the world is more dangerous, less prosperous, more stressful, and less fun because of it. The excitement I had about China when I was a student in Taiwan became real when I came to work as a diplomat in China in the mid-1990s. I remember well the recommendation from then Chinese President Jiang Zemin that both China and the United States should seek to understand each other better. Mutual understanding was the goal. And indeed, thousands of initiatives from student projects in schools to strategic and economic dialogues at the highest levels of our governments were devoted to seeking mutual understanding. I participated in some of those high-level dialogues. It was a heady time. Hopes were high, and a lot of good was done. Many people seek rightly to study the past to better anticipate the future. Is there something in the past that might serve as a useful model to help us understand U.S.-China relations today? For example, might the Cold War of the latter 20th century between the U.S. and the Soviet Union be a useful model to study? Well, let's take a look. 1. In the 1960s through the 1980s, the Soviet economy was vastly smaller and less innovative than that of the United States. The Chinese economy today, on the other hand, overtook that of the United States, adjusting for purchasing power parity in 2014, and no doubt in a matter of years will be larger than that of the United States by every measure. 2, the Soviet economy was cut off from most of the world, both because of its own inefficiencies and because of the barriers put up by Western nations. China today is the largest trading nation in the world. For most countries, China is its largest trading partner. 3, there is a significant technology gap between the Soviet Union and the United States, both in military hardware and commercial products and services. Today, Huawei, TikTok, and other Chinese technology companies are highly competitive around the globe. 4, the people of the Soviet Union were largely cut off from interacting with people outside the Soviet bloc. Today, the Chinese people trade, travel, and do business with people all over the world. Millions of Chinese and Americans in particular know each other well and are friends. 5, the Soviets threatened to bury the West and said that democracy must be destroyed in the march of history they foresaw. Unlike Soviet aspirations, the China dream does not require anyone else to be destroyed. So the Cold War is a poor reflection of the U.S.-China dynamic today. Well, how about the period of great nation competition from the 18th to the 20th centuries? Is this a good model to look at? This was the period when the British Empire held sway over much of the earth. Indeed, the sun never set on the British Empire. The aim of the Brits was to apply their superior force in every conflict. Might great power competition, the idea that might makes right, be an appropriate lens through which to see the U.S.-China relationship today? I think not. China has made great strides in developing its military capabilities, especially in naval and air strength, seeking to match the United States. But to assume that a conflict today would be fought by aircraft carrier battle groups and fighter jets is to fight a previous war. Prior to World War I, the French thought they had employed the latest technology and modern strategy, the Maginot Line, only to find that it was irrelevant once the real fighting began. And valiant cavalry charges were mowed down by machine guns. If there were to be a serious military conflict between the major powers today, where would the battlefield be? Most likely, it would be in space and cyberspace. It would involve artificial intelligence that could shape the conflict in uncontrollable ways and be very difficult to stop. It would be like nothing the world has ever seen. And then there are nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons of mass destruction. No one knows what would trigger the use of these weapons or how that use might escalate. These weapons, with the power to destroy humanity as we know it, were never part of the might makes right era of the British Empire, or of the Greeks and the Persians, or the Spanish, or the Mongols either, for that matter. In a great nation conflict today, there would be no winners. And this is just in the military realm. The damage to infrastructure, subsequent economic devastation would be enormous, to say nothing of the reputational damage and the horrific cost to human life and well-being. So the old model that says that the most powerful nation will prevail is also not really a good model for what we face in the 21st century. Indeed, I argue that there is no historical precedent for the US-China relationship today. Consider this. In one realm of US-China relations, there are serious concerns about the growth and use of military and intelligence capabilities, alliance obligations, and severe trade frictions around the globe. The risk of accidental military conflict is high, and each government is insisting that all the problems are being caused by the other side. It is disturbing and increasing anxiety worldwide. Yet, in another realm, our two countries are cooperating and getting along like never before. You've heard some of those messages in the conference thus far. Annual trade between our countries has now reached $690 billion, the highest ever. Before the COVID pandemic put things on hold, 140,000 people flew between China and the United States every week. When I was Consul General in Shanghai, our 4th of July celebration had an NBA theme, and Chinese basketball star Yao Ming came. I came up to about his waist. Very impressive guy. The second largest fan base for the National Basketball Association is in China. Some 350,000 Chinese students studied in the United States, and the Chinese government was giving scholarships to American students to study in China. General Motors began selling more cars in China than in the United States. American entrepreneurs in China were thriving. The wife in one family I knew made cinnamon rolls for Relief Society. When people asked for more, her husband got an idea, and a cinnamon roll enterprise was born in China. China is a great place to do business. So this two-realm relationship is as head-scratching as it is unprecedented. As we move into the future of US-China relations, we will be charting a path that has never been walked before. If there is to be a brighter future for US-China relations, a relationship where we can get along even if we do not resolve all of our differences, two things are needed. First, the United States needs to accept the fact that China is now a global superpower and needs to show respect for China's status, accomplishments, and contributions. Americans must rid themselves of the fanciful notion that China is somehow inherently flawed and will collapse from demographic trends, financial weakness, outdated governance models, or something else, so that we need not face the reality that we are no longer the world's lone superpower. It may be a hard pill to swallow, but that is the new reality. Indeed, many Americans are simply aware, as Dr. Larson mentioned, that for most of the past 2,000 years, China has had the world's largest economy and been the leader in technological, artistic, and social development. But I can assure you that the Chinese people are well aware of that history. Think what the Western world would be like today if the Roman Empire had never fallen. If the institutions of the Roman Empire still existed today, if Latin were the dominant language of the European and Mediterranean worlds, and if the literature, poetry, and philosophy of the Romans had continued to develop for the past 2,000 years, how would life be like today? How would it be enriched by the collective wisdom gained in the twists and turns of a vibrant Roman society over the centuries? Well, that is how the Chinese feel about themselves and China today. But there's more we need to appreciate. Because the Industrial Revolution began in Manchester, England, instead of Hangzhou or Beijing, when foreign colonialists encountered Imperial China in the early 1800s, they were able to dominate and humiliate the Middle Kingdom, forcing the Chinese to legalize opium, give up territory, and accept foreign military forces inside their country, carving up China like a melon. In the 1930s and 40s, foreign forces killed millions of unprotected Chinese civilians. Those colonialists are all long dead now, but Chinese determination to regain their power and status is very much alive. Following the end of this century of humiliation, China's embrace of Marxist economic policies kept the country mired in poverty until 1978. But since that time, the energy of hundreds of millions of smart, hardworking Chinese has been unleashed, and China's economic growth has been a marvel of the modern history of the world. While we do not like all the methods that the Chinese have used to jumpstart their economic and technological growth, if we delude ourselves into thinking that somehow it was our policy missteps that allowed the rise of a global rival, we will miss the point. The Chinese largely deserve the wealth and power they have gained in recent decades because they have earned it. China's rejuvenation is China's story, not ours. The second thing that is needed for a brighter future in U.S.-China relations is for China to recognize the enduring attraction of the values that the United States seeks to embody. Our country was founded on the ideals of liberty, justice, the rule of law, and equality before the law, freedom of belief, free speech, freedom of opportunity, and the ability of people to have a say in their governance, and independent courts to see that those in power uphold those principles. Now, anyone who has read a U.S. history textbook after 5th grade or who listens to the news today knows that the United States has always struggled to live up to its ideals. But the existence of those struggles shows how important we Americans feel it is to us to tirelessly pursue those ideals. Our promotion of intrinsic human values is not something new to compensate for declining world influence. It goes way back. A book I read recently called The Pioneers by David McCulloch reminded me of this truth. When our country was just getting started and there was great competition for land with Great Britain and France on the North American continent, Congress passed the Northwest Ordinance, which made clear how that new territory was to be governed was of prime importance. What would homes be worth without good governance, it was said. Article 3 states that religion, morality, and education were necessary and slavery was outlawed. McCulloch notes that one widely respected later historian, Harvard's Albert Bushnell Hart, concluded that the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 stands alongside the Magna Carta and the Declaration of Independence as a bold assertion of the rights of the individual. I am deeply dismayed, as are many others, at the political divisions in the United States today, and that too often we do not treat each other with the civility and respect that we should. But the challenges we face today are not more serious than the civil rights battles of the 1960s, or the McCarthyism of the 1950s, or the Great Depression, or the Civil War. Those who look at the United States today and its political model of rights and liberties and believe that it is in permanent decline are free to think so, but they are wrong. The basic human desires to be free, to be treated fairly, to have hard work and enterprise rewarded, to feel safe, to have access to information and speak one's mind, to freely associate with others with common beliefs, and to have a say in one's governance are not limited to any one nation or culture or ethnic group. Every nation has a distinct culture, so the order of priority of these different human desires may vary somewhat between countries, but they are intrinsic to the human experience. As the United States seeks, however imperfectly, to inculcate these values, China needs to acknowledge and respect those efforts, regardless of how it chooses to govern itself. the attraction of the American dream is not going to go away. Too many Americans, especially politicians, overplay American power and underplay American influence. We do not have the power to change China, but China could choose to change itself if it were to see a good example in us. So, how do we move forward? Of course, any relationship that is as broad-based as the US-China relationship has many areas that need attention. But one of the most powerful elements is often overlooked. We need to talk. The sad consequence of the recent balloon fiasco was that the visit of the Secretary of State Blinken to Beijing was canceled after it had been so long since there had been such high-level interaction between China and the United States. Since when does refusing to communicate about problems make them better? Agreeing to talk is not a concession. Both the United States and China are guilty of treating communication as a favor, something to be taken back to punish the other side if they do something we don't like. It's a bad practice. I spent my career as a diplomat, so I acknowledge a bias toward communicating with people to improve relationships. But I'm also well aware that how you communicate is important. Years ago, when I was a young diplomat working in the Department of State in Washington, D.C., I was assigned to prepare talking points for a meeting between our Undersecretary of State and his counterpart in the European Economic Union, your economic community. I did so diligently and got all the approvals. The seating for the meeting was set up like a horseshoe. Our Undersecretary was at the top, seated next to his counterpart, and our next highest official was next to him, and the next highest ranking official next to her, and on down to the lowest ranking official, which was me, at the very end. It was the same on the other side. The Undersecretary had the talking points in his coat pocket, and I was waiting to see how deftly he would manage the conversation and whether he would need to discreetly refer to the points to make sure that all of our positions and concerns were effectively presented. The meeting began with polite chit-chat. It was followed by more chit-chat. I kept waiting and waiting for the substantive discussion to begin. It never did. Then, just before the meeting ended, the Undersecretary reached into his pocket and said, "Oh, here, this is some stuff my staff wanted you to have." And he handed it, my carefully prepared talking points, to his counterpart, who, without looking at them, handed them to the official next to him, who did the same until they ended up at the very end of the line with the lowest ranking official, my counterpart, who put them in his briefcase. That was not effective communication. When tensions are high and trust is low, as is the case today between the governments of China and the United States, let me suggest the following way to conduct discussions. First, presentation. Both sides present their points of view, why they take the positions they do. At this stage, you do not speak about the other side's positions. You should simply share your own and respectfully listen. Second, question. Each side asks questions to gain clarification. Third, discussion. Now that each side has respectfully listened to the other side, you can have some give and take, including concerns about the other side's positions. Perhaps both sides may agree to conduct negotiations, which is something different than simply having talks, at a later date to put up some guardrails in the relationship. In any case, you should agree to talk again before too long. I know what you're thinking. This seems so simple as to be without any real value. But I argue that such discussions can bring significant results. First, in respectful talks, we are reminded that we are all human beings. When people do not talk to each other, it is too easy to demonize the other side and forget what you have in common. Second, You polish off the sharpest edges in your disagreements as you come to understand why the other side thinks as you do. This calms emotions and promotes clear thinking. And little by little, you can develop trust. Third, just by holding talks, you communicate to your domestic constituents that this relationship is important and you are working to promote their interests. You may have heard of the different tracks that nations use to discuss things. Track 1 is talks between official government leaders. Then there is track 2, which is organized discussions between academics, business people, or others not in government. Such people have greater leeway to explore ideas beyond what has been established as official positions, which government officials are usually required to pronounce and not deviate from. There is also something called track 1.5, which is a combination of the two. Now that COVID restrictions on travel have been lifted, these dialogues should resume across the board between the United States and China on all tracks. In talking about talking, I don't want to leave the impression that I don't think there are serious disagreements, and deadly serious problems in the US-China relationship. There are. My point, rather, is that whatever the problems and disagreements, it is important to talk, and by so doing, show respect for each other. Both the United States and China must give up on the idea that we need not treat each other with respect because somehow the other side will be so overwhelmed by our criticism that they will crumble and accept our point of view. It's not going to happen. We must learn how to get along with each other despite our differences, and to do so, it is vital that we talk. We would all love to solve problems once and for all. But in the practice of diplomatic relations, you often have to simply manage problems that cannot be solved, at least in the foreseeable future. Now, what can you do? 1, learn how to talk. Learn how to have honest and respectful discussion. Make it a habit so that when you are in influential and leadership positions later in life and face problems in the US-China relationship or in any other relationship in your life, you will know what to do. 2, get good information about China and US-China relations. Does your news come from respected news and organizations with experienced editors whose job it is to confirm multiple credible sources for claims made? Or from sources that put out teaser headlines, hair-on-fire revelations, and half-truths clamoring for attention? Let me give you one small example. This is from an Apple News compilation on February 12, 2023, quoting a member of the US Congress. Quote, "So when we are allowing Chinese corporations on American soil, remember, they are not allowing the same in China. They are not allowing American corporations to buy land in China." End quote. That is true. But just because something is true, it doesn't mean it's the whole story. China has a different concept of land ownership. Chinese corporations cannot own land in China either. Rather, land is owned by the state and leased for 30, 50, or 70 years to buyers, depending upon the use to which it will be put. Residences are for 70 years, for example. There are thousands of American companies operating profitably in China without actually owning the land there. Okay. In my view, time has shown that Jiang Zemin was right, and the need for greater mutual understanding and respect is as important now as ever. Once when I was living in Shanghai, I was invited by a college professor to visit his home. He had lived in the United States for a few years and wanted to show me the home that he had built after returning to China. As we walked down a hallway with bookshelves along one side, he pulled a discreet lever, and one bookshelf opened at an angle to the hall to reveal a stairway to a secret study room upstairs. He said with a smile, "I saw this in an American house and knew I just had to have one." If you visit our home here in Provo, you will see a wall leading to our dining room with a large Chinese-style moon gate surrounded with shelves with knickknacks. When I was in China years ago, I saw one of these and knew I just had to have one. Visitors to our home think it is pretty cool. There are so many things in the interactions between the Chinese people and the American people that are really cool. I have had a wonderful career, which has involved many years living in China, working for better U.S.-China relations. But I'm retired now. Now, it's your turn. Thank you.
Our final and keynote speaker for this year's conference will be Counselor Wang Xiaofeng of the Chinese Embassy of China in the United States.
今天会议的最后一位演讲者，也是我们的主讲人，是中华人民共和国驻美利坚合众国大使馆参赞王晓峰。
Counselor Wang is the acting chief of the political section of the embassy, covering the overall China-U.S. relationship. Counselor Wang joined the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 2000 and initially worked with the ministry's Department of Information. His earlier assignments included the Office of the Commissioner of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Hong Kong, SAR, and Chinese Embassy in India. During the Beijing 2008 Olympics, he was the coordinator of the Organizing Committee's International VIP Reception Center. Between 2008 and 2016, he was the director of the Chinese Foreign Ministry Spokesperson's Office and Office of Public Diplomacy. Since 2016, he has been working as the political counselor of the Chinese Embassy to the United States.
王晓峰参赞是中国驻美大使馆双边处代理主任，负责处理中美整体双边关系。王参赞曾于2000年加入中国外交部，最初在外交部新闻司工作。王参赞曾先后在外交部驻香港特别行政区特派员公署和中国驻印度大使馆常驻。在2008年北京奥运会期间，他是北京奥组委国际贵宾接待处中心协调员。2008年至2016年期间，他曾担任中国外交部发言人办公室主任和公共外交办公室主任。自2016年以来，他担任中国驻美大使馆政务参赞。
Please welcome our keynote speaker, Counselor Wang, to the stage.
有请王参赞。
Thank you, everyone. Professor Robert Griffin, thank you for sharing your critical thinking, wisdom, especially the constructive suggestions for the bilateral relations, one of the most important relations in the world. And dear Dr. Kurt Larson, Dr. Yi Zhihong, and Dr. Kang Changyun, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, it's a pleasure to meet you and join you in the 2023 BYU China Conference. First, I would like to congratulate Dr. Peter Chan and the Student Executive Committee who make this conference happen. I was deeply impressed to know that such a successful and a professional event was mostly run by the students rather than the university staff. Yesterday, me and my colleagues, we paid a visit to This Is the Place Historic Heritage Park. I was impressed by the spirit of the pioneers. I want to see this is the right place where the Brigham Young, the second leader of the Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints, find the land of religious freedom and bright future. This is the right place where the BYU Performing Arts ensembles, also known as the Young Ambassadors, who toured China in 1979, kicked off the people-to-people exchange and the cultural exchange between China and the United States. This is also the right place where young talents, they speak Chinese, love Chinese culture, devoted to China and US friendship. As we now today, a group of relative older folks are talking about the past and the future of China-US relations, I believe the future of our two countries and the two peoples lies in you, the new young ambassadors. I listened carefully to the speeches in this morning and benefit a lot from the source and insights. Obviously, all of us in this room agreed that it is extremely important today to understand China, China's foreign policy, and China-US relations. As the world is undergoing historic changes of a profound and far-reaching impact, we need more than ever a vision to guide our way forward, a viable way to address our challenges, and a greater strength to build consensus. I'm more than pleased to have this opportunity to share with you my perspective on these issues. For both the world and China, we are now at a time fraught with challenges and a critical juncture of histories. Where we go? Around the world, global security faces uncertainty. Global economy recovery is fragile and unsteady. Various risks and crises are emerging. The international community has to brief for challenges of geopolitical conflicts, both bloc confrontations, surging inflation, energy crunch, and etc. The world has entered a new phase of turbulence and transformation. Changes unseen in a century are accelerating. That said, crisis begins change, giving birth to hope. The world continues to move forward. Multipolarity and economic globalization is deepening. And our societies are becoming increasingly digitalized and culturally diversified. Indeed, countries are becoming more interconnected and interdependent. Peace and development remain the underlying trend of our times. Around the world, the people call for progress and cooperation is getting louder than ever before. As in China, there are two major events held recently. The first one is the 20th CPC National Congress held in October last year. It had mapped a grand blueprint for advancing the great reunification of Chinese nation on all fronts. The Party Congress also offers China's solution to the problems facing all humanity, providing much-needed certainty and stability to a world rocked by changes and turmoil. The keyword of the 20th CPC National Congress is to pursue a Chinese path to modernization. The Chinese modernization is rooted in Chinese reality in keeping with the global trend. This modernization features peaceful development and harmony between man and nature, and will present a new opportunity to the cooperation between China and other countries. As a political party that comes from the people, the CPC always adheres to people-centered development philosophy and regards improving people's well-being as the starting point and goals of implementing a series of policy. The second event is ongoing annual two sessions. As we speak at the moment, the representatives from all areas sectors, ethnics in China have gathered in Beijing for this year's annual two-session meetings, which is the National People's Congress and China's top political advisory body, the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference. In this progress, any matters that concerns China, the people's keen interest are broadly discussed at People's Congress. The government, the Political Consultative Conference, social organizations, and industrial associations before major decisions are made to make sure what the people want are reflected in the final decisions. For example, when drafting the 20th CPC National Congress report, the CPC Central Committee conducted 2 rounds of appropriate intra-party consultations, soliciting opinion from over 4,700 people and carry out extensive consultations among the public via online channels, collecting over 8.5 million opinions. This is why we see that China has a whole process, people's democracy, a democracy from the people to the people and with the people for the people. We believe the empty talk will do nothing for our country. Only solid work will make it flourish. Once the blueprint is determined, we will roll up our sleeves and work hard to implement it to the end. I just spent some time to introduce what China is doing against the backdrop of current international sphere. After the 20th Party Congress, a lot of American friends came to us and asked, what on earth is Chinese modernization? I would say, let's see what China has been doing. Over the past 40 years, 800 million people were lifted out of extreme poverty, contributing close to 3/4 of the global reduction in the number of people living in extreme poverty. China has become the world's second largest economy and the biggest trading nation, and it contributes over 30% to global economy strength, growth annually. Almost every Chinese has basic medical insurance and old age pension insurance. Green and low carbon living has become a new fashion. The Chinese are driving 50% of the world's new energy vehicles. The Tesla Gigafactory in Shanghai last year produced over 710,000 vehicles. That means almost over 50% of global productions came from China plant of Tesla. And 10% of China's population, that is 140 million people, have visited other countries to open up their eyes. Compared to the China that the BYU ambassadors visited in 1979, China today has seen earth-breaking changes take place all over the country. As a large country with a population of 1.4 billion and the largest developing country in the world, our top priority is to concentrate to rein our fears, our own fears, well, which is in itself a great contribution to human development. This philosophy has determined China's strategic goal and foreign policy. China's development is not to challenge, overthrow, or replace anyone. If China really have a so-called long game or 100 years of a marathon, it is to tell all Chinese people to lead a good life. Of course, no one can obstruct the rights of Chinese people to aspire to a better life. This is also why the CPC decided that Chinese modernization should be a modernization of peaceful development, and in pursuit of the modernization, we will not treat the old path of war, colonization, and plunder taken by other countries. We will keep dedicated to peace, development, cooperation, and mutual benefit. First, China will continue to be a builder of the world peace. China's keeping to peace development is a strategy choice informed by a deep grasp of the past, present, and the future. Looking over the past, China suffered deeply from aggressions, expansions, outside in modern time. The Chinese people value peace more than anyone else. Just like Confucius said, no one should do to others what he does want others to do himself. 己所不欲，勿施于人. China does not subscribe to the notion that a country is bound to seek hegemony when it grows in strength. Hegemony or militarize is simply not the genius of the Chinese people. China is the top contributor of the peacekeeping personnel among the permanent members of the United Nations Council. Over 2,400 Chinese peacekeepers are on duty worldwide today. China is also the second largest funding contributor to both the United Nations and its peacekeeping operations. China is the only country in the world that pledges to keep a path of peaceful development in its constitution. It is the only one among the 5 nuclear weapon states that is committed to no first use of nuclear weapons. China has made important contribution to maintaining global strategic stability. China is working with other countries to build a human community with a shared future. This is not a political slogan, but a fact about how China sees the world. Second, China will continue to be a contributor of global development. China has endured to build a system of high standard, opening up and safeguard the security and stability of global industrial and supply chains. China is a major trading partner over 130 countries and regions. China is a pace setter in implementing the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. China is also an active participant in global governance and South-South cooperation. It has provided development aid to more than 160 countries in need, and extended more debt service payments owned by the developing countries. President Xi Jinping proposed the Global Development Initiative. It is a rallying call to refocus attention of the international community on development. Another example is China's Belt and Road Initiative. Last year, China's trade with Belt Road partners grew by over 20%, despite the downward trends elsewhere. The China-Europe Railway Express completed a record number of services, showing strong resilience. A large number of significant projects made important advances. The first high-speed railway in Association of Southeast Asia nations made its trial run. The first expressway in Cambodia, now up and running, the China-Laos Railway, which had already been put into operations, and the Budapest-Belgrade Railway and the bridge project in Croatia have effectively improved local transportation. All these projects showcase that the path of peace, development, and mutual beneficial cooperation has worked, and worked well. China believes that every country has the right to development, and everyone has a desire to develop. On the path of development, no country or individual should be left behind. Third, China will continue to become a defender of international order. Today's international order is built on the victory of the World Anti-Fascist War, which cost the lives and blood of 35 million Chinese soldiers and civilians. As a founding member of the UN and the first country to sign the UN Charter, China has no reason, still less the need, to reinvent the wheel. We are committed to upholding the purpose and principles of the UN Charter. The international system with the UN at its core and the international order based on international law. Through the past 10 years, China has put forward a host of major initiatives and proposals, including building a community with a shared future for mankind, the Belt and Road Initiative, the Common Value of Humanity, the Global Development Initiative, and the Global Security Initiative. The core message of these initiatives, that is, countries are interdependent, mankind have a shared future, and the international community must get united for cooperation. With solidarity and cooperation, we can defeat COVID, address the climate change, tackle the deficit in peace, security, development, and governance, and build an open, inclusive, clean, beautiful world for lasting peace, universal security, and common prosperity. Under China's foreign policy is the premises of understanding China-U.S. policy and Chinese-U.S. relations. No one could deny the significance of the establishment of the diplomacy between China and the U.S. over 50 years ago. No one could deny the tangible achievements through China-U.S. cooperations to two great people. I have to say, the past few years have seen China-U.S. relations at a low ebb since the establishment of diplomatic ties. The reality of China-U.S. interdependence is ignored. The history of our win-win cooperation is misrepresented. The channels, dialogues, communications are blocked, and the bilateral relations is being defined, impacted generally by so-called strategic competition. This is bringing tremendous uncertainty to the future of our peoples. As one of the longest-serving Chinese diplomats in D.C., I have worked in U.S. for more than 6 years and witnessed ups and downs of the relationship. Here in Provo, it's cold outside, but I could enjoy the beautiful snow scenery in this warm, heated room with your people. However, in D.C., even there's a cherry blossom season, the political atmosphere is even colder than here. This is also not what the Chinese side would like to see. Because China-U.S. relations have well exceeded the bilateral scope and carry implications for the whole world, the global community expects China and the U.S. to take the lead, fulfill the responsibility as major countries, keep bilateral ties stable, and advance global corporations. A recent episode in China's U.S. relation is the unmanned airship accident. We call it a balloon incident, which has become a diplomatic crisis that could have been avoided by quiet, professional diplomatic communications. The wandering balloon accident can reveal something fundamental. In my view, the root cause of this difficulty in the relationship lies in the U.S. perception on China and China's strategy goals. It regards China as the most serious competitor and the most consequential geopolitical challenge. The latest U.S. national security strategy takes China as the most serious competitor and the most consequential geopolitical challenge, and mentions China for more than 6 times. This is a serious misperception of China-U.S. relations and misleading of China's development, and would mislead the people of the two countries and the international community. Just like when I'm in high school, I have textbooks to teach the U.S. is open and inclusive country, just like Dr. Lawson mentioned in early speech. In the early period, the U.S. used every means, even including the guns and cannons, to request China to open. However, nowadays, the U.S. side uses every means, even including the weaponize the economy and the technology issues, to shut out to China. I have 2 questions I might ask you guys. First, that the U.S. accepted the development of a major country like China with different history, system, and culture. Does it acknowledge that the 1.4 billion Chinese people also have the right to pursue well-being, as long as these 2 problems are figured out? Many problems in China-U.S. relations can be solved easily. The relationship between countries is just like the everyday relationship we have with people around us. To get along with each other, we need to answer a few fundamental questions first. Are we partners or friends, or even rivals or enemies? Should we have dialogue on cooperation, or decoupling, or even confrontation? How could we find a way out for our relations? I wish to share with you some of my observations. First, China and the United States should regard each other as friends, at least partners, rather than rivals or even enemies. Former U.S. Secretary of Defense General James Mattis once put that there's no better friend, no worse enemy than a U.S. Marine to the world. For the United States, I want to say there's no better partner, no worse rivals than China. China and the United States differ from each other in history, culture, social system, development paths, and national conditions. Disagreements and frictions between us are almost inevitable. Which matters most is what we perceive them objectively and handle them properly. As ancient Chinese saying goes, all living things should flourish without harming each other. All ways of life should thrive without hindering each other. 万物并育不相害，道并行而不相悖. And also, American says, it's our difference that make us unique and beautiful. Since day one of re-engagement in the 1970s, China and the United States realized that our 2 countries are hugely different. But such differences have not kept our people from building friendship. They have not hindered the exchanges and cooperation between our 2 countries over the past 50 years. I have explained China's goal to let the Chinese people have a better life. China has no interest hegemony or no intention to challenge, defeat, or replace the United States. In fact, the 20th CPC National Congress report did not mention the US for a single time. Our most basic expectations for the China-US relations is for the two countries to live with each other in peace. The biggest obstacle to peaceful coexistence between China and the United States is the Cold War mentality. Though the USA side frequently said that it has no intention to start a new Cold War, where we see is that certain people have started casting a new iron curtain in Pacific. The US is frequently deploying naval and air forces near China's adjacent waters to flex muscles, expanding arms sales to Taiwan, decoupling with China's economy, especially in high-tech sectors, pressing Chinese tech companies. The Cold War mentality has long become archaeologism in 21st century. I have to say, the body already in 21st century, but the mentality still in the past. China is not a former Soviet Union. The world is not what it used to be. It only backfired because in the eyes of Chinese people, this is containing and encircling China and preventing them to pursue a better life. Only after waking up from the Cold War dreams can one view and handle China-US relations in a cool-headed, rational, and realistic way. Second, China and the United States should cooperate for mutual benefit rather than decouple by breaking the links. Given the size of our economies and the level and interdependence, the so-called decoupling and shutting door to each other is not just like an attempt to build castles in the air. China does not deny that our two countries do have competitions in areas like economy and trade. And we do not fear such competition. But we do not agree that competition is the entirety or the mainstream of this important relationship. Competition should also be fair rather than malicious confrontations. Imagine two athletes competing in the Olympic race. If one athlete, instead of focusing on giving his own best, always try to triple or even injure the others, this is not a fair game. Win-win cooperation is the true narrative of China-US relations in the past half-century. It should remain the goal we both pursue. In fact, China and the United States have a lot to offer to each other. No two major countries have closer people-to-people contacts or more interconnected interests than China and the United States. Before the pandemic, there were more than 300 flights between our two countries every week, and over 5 million mutual visits every year. We once had more than 100 dialogue and exchange mechanisms, 50 pairs of sister provinces and states, and 234 sister city relationships. Despite the pandemic and additional U.S. tariff on Chinese exports, the two-way trade last year topped $750 million, up by 28.7% year on year. The two-way investment reached over $214 billion. 66% of U.S. business in China reported plans to invest more in China. These solid facts and figures fully demonstrate that the Chinese and American people want cooperation, and our cooperation is driven by win-win outcomes. Besides, our two countries shoulder important responsibility in addressing global issues like economic recovery, climate change, terrorism, proliferation, and regional hotspots. Cooperation is always our best choice. Third, China and the United States should strengthen dialogue and exchanges at all levels and in various fields to enhance understanding, mutual trust, and respect. China-US relationship should not be determined by the common interest and shared responsibility, should be determined by the common interest and shared responsibility of the two countries and by the friendship between the Chinese and American peoples, rather than by the US domestic politics or the new Marxism. In 1979, the BYU Young Ambassador opened the clue to the people-to-people and cultural exchanges between China and the United States after the establishment of diplomatic relations. Over the past 50 years, the BYU Performing Arts ensembles visited China for more than 30 times, which promoted the understanding and friendship between BYU and China, and also between the two people. But nowadays, even such friendly and mutually benefit cooperation and exchanges could be blocked by political agenda, and more people with vision and insight have stepped out and spoke out bravely on the Capitol Hill. You can see on the meeting here in the Capitol, someone stand up and say China is not our enemy. The American people need a cooperation, not competition with China. Our people desire for enhanced exchanges and cooperation must be honored. Interactions on business, science, technology, education, tourism, culture, youth, and at the subnational level must be encouraged, not restricted or blocked. Seeing is believing. We welcome the American people to visit China, more places to see more things, to experience the real China. We believe the persistence will pay off, just like in the movie of Shawshank Redemption. The embassy, the Chinese embassy, will continue to create opportunity for mutual understanding and cooperation between China and the US people. We also, like the singers Paul Simon and Garfunkel, the embassy will build bridges over the troubled waters. Ladies and gentlemen, President Xi Jinping noted that the most important event in the international relations over the past 50 years was the reopening and the development of China-US relations, which has benefited the two countries and the whole world. The most important event in the international relations in the coming 50 years will be for China and the United States to find the right way to get along. As the two largest economies, China and the United States have to coexist at the end of the day. China will continue to follow the principles put forth by the President Xi Jinping, namely mutual respect, peaceful coexistence, and win-win cooperation to pursue a sound and stable relationship with the United States. We hope that China and the US will draw on past experience to find inspiration for present and gain the strength for coming forward. As Martin Luther King Jr. says, the time is always right to do what is right to do. And also, Master Yoda says, may the force be with us all. Thank you.
prayer for the closing of our speaker session and blessing of the food will be given by Preston Pond, Director of On-Campus Relations and Social Media Outreach.
接下来，我们将由校内关系和社交媒体部门负责人云开为我们做结束上午议程和祝福食物的祈祷。
Following the prayer, we invite everyone to stay in their seats for instruction regarding lunch.
在祈祷结束之后，请大家在自己的座位上继续就坐。我们将继续宣告午餐的注意事项。
Our dear Heavenly Father, we are so very grateful for this opportunity that we all have to learn more about the relationship between the United States and China. We're grateful for this opportunity to learn more about how we ourselves can contribute to deepening these culture ties and deepening the relationship of future Chinese-U.S. relations. Please help us to be able to remember our role as students and as members of the BYU community. Please help us to remember our divinely given power and responsibilities to do so in making this world a better place. Please bless this wonderful lunch that we have provided for us to be able to give us health and strength. And please bless the speakers as they continue on to answer our questions in the panel, that they will be able to have the Spirit to be with them as well. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
This panel session will host each of the speakers from the morning session who will be answering questions submitted by the audience and selected by our volunteers.
接下来我们将进行座谈会的部分。座谈会的部分将由每位演讲者参与并主持，他们将回答由听众提交并由我们志愿者挑选出的问题。
As a final reminder, the back of your programs has a QR code. Feel free to scan it and submit questions at any point throughout the meeting.
我们在此再次提醒，在各位的议程单背后有一个二维码，在座谈会期间，大家可以随时通过扫描二维码补充提问。OK。
Please welcome our distinguished speakers back to the stand.
现在请欢迎我们敬爱的演讲者们回到台上就座。
All right, I will talk about sort of the process, the protocol here, while we wait for our fourth guest to join us. So a lot of stimulating ideas have been shared this morning, and you all have asked some really interesting questions about them. So it's my job as moderator to articulate these questions. In some cases, the target of the question is obvious. In other cases, it may be one that more than one of you wish to answer or opine on. And so we'll just sort of take this organically. And I will try to mix up the topics a little bit so we get sort of a wide coverage of both the speaker's expertise and interests and also your interests. So this first one's a big one that I think many of our panelists could address. What can be done by the average citizen to breach and positively impact issues between the United States and China?
I presume the question is assuming U.S. citizens.
It does not specify, but that probably could be either.
Well, I can speak to that.
Okay.
I think that right now, if you look at the headlines about U.S.-China relations, most of them are generated in Washington, D.C., mostly involving deliberations by Congress. Now, Congress is supposed to represent the people, but if they never hear from the people, then they're not going to be guided in that way. So one thing I would recommend is write to your congressman or woman and tell them a perspective on China that you have. And I would just advise you, don't have your hair on fire when you talk to them. You know, be calm, be rational, be fact-based, and push back against the visceral, emotional responses that are really going around in Washington now. It's not that you even have to disagree. I mean, I'm not trying to say that what Congress says isn't right, but it's not helpful when it's talked about in a highly emotional manner, as if, when it's just not fact-based. So respond to Congress people with calm, fact-based views. That's one thing American citizens can do.
Thanks, Professor. I want to add a few words. We always believe the China-U.S. relationship rooted in the people and the hopes on the youth. I will give a person name that is Helen Judy Foster. Helen Foster, I'm sorry. Helen Foster. She's not a political figure. She's ordinary people, a journalist who want China to know about China, write the objective story about China, to let people know what China is really like. This story will lasting long. So in a social media area, it's not we can get information from China, it's we get too much information about China, and also the same about the US. We should to draw our own conclusion from so many information, make right decision. So I still think the communication and mutual understanding is very important. So we will not be affected by the voices from the Congress, the voice from the newspapers. We should explore by reading, by engagement with people together to find the real situation of our two countries. So this is very important. I think it's, every people like a star in the sky. If we spread all over the world, you're a little star, but we get it together like a big fire. You will light the sky. So ordinary people play important role, can push forward the relationship. Thank you.
So I think to answer this question, just based my personal experience as the former dean of a business school for 8 years and the vice president for international affairs for 5 years. So I will strongly recommend our students just open their eyes, just go out. In Chinese, we always say 世界观. So, but we say if you haven't have any chance to say the word, how can you have 世界观? So just go outside to experience, to know what's going on there, to get to know different people, to get different perspective of the world, the world look like. So I still try to doing that to the student.
It looks like political issue, right? Very political topic. originally I do not want to speak out my voice, but I could not help that. In the past, I mean, the hard situation right now, definitely, it's, from historical eyesight, it's just a moment. Like, you talk about the people like a star, and from the timeline, it's just a moment. I mean, the hard situation, a kind of crazy, I mean, it's basically, it's caused by a little politicians, a little crazy persons. As an educator, we do not like control one, like the gentleman. We should think about what we can do. Today. I mean, efforts, by the BYU colleagues, particularly by the new generation of young BYU students. They have, use their professional way. They have moved forward for this hard situation. Let us, trust the future. Let us, keep in mind the BYU spirit, the hands in our, the future in our hands. The world is yours. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So let's ask a question about education and Chinese-American relations. This is an interesting question. What is the feasibility of an American becoming a full professor in China? How likely is that to change in the next decade? I think that's you. What is the feasibility of an American becoming a full professor in China, in a Chinese university? And is this likely to change in the near future?
I think this lady will have more strong voice because he was the president of China top university, a kind of political university, Zemin University. You can have first her voice.
Yeah, I said Beijing Normal University is #1. Okay, so very little background about Renmin University. We also say #1, especially in humanity and the social sciences. So, Beijing University much more humanity and sciences, and Tsinghua University much more engineering. So in the past few decades, we have put lots of efforts to try to attract more international talents. So when I was the dean of a business school for 8 years, we went to go the accreditation, international accreditation for American, US accreditation, and also European accreditation. There's a criteria, requirement that the ratio of your faculty has to be, some ratio your faculty has to be international. So we try to attract more international faculties. So up to now, I haven't had any change for this situation. So we still put a lot of effort to do that. So we welcome. So even at business school, we even we change our working language, not just Chinese, but meantime also English. So when we have a conference, we have a notice, both Chinese and English.
I don't really know the answer, but I'll go ahead and say anything anyways. I have known Americans when I was in Consul General there who were teaching as professors in Chinese universities. It was always in a situation where they were teaching in English, so it had to be an English program. Speaking with them, I never got the sense that they viewed their participation there as a career track leading to full tenureship. but I think, so I could not name any American who's a full professor in China, but as was mentioned, in terms of short-term international program, English-speaking, technical expertise, I think those sorts of people, there are many opportunities in China for people to do that.
All right, now we have a fintech question. How will the rapidly aging and declining population of China affect fintech industry there?
Sorry, can I have the question?
Sure. So, and there are actually two questions that are very closely related, so I'll ask the second one the same thing. Okay. How does fintech affect the older generation of people?
And this is the question we've been discussing several while about is kind of what we call digital gap. Digital gap. Sure, it is. It exists for the elderly people. They cannot use the new technology. Sure, it is. So I think there are a lot of things need to be done. Need to do, so we need educate the elderly people. For the elderly people, they also need change their attitude and behavior, because in Chinese, total averagely, when people are approaching 60s, they will feel, oh, I'm old man. Yeah, but now the people can live until their 90s. So they still at least 30 years to live after retirement. So they need to learn too. So I think they are both two sides. Yeah, so the society and even the universities colleagues should do something, and also the elderly people, they also should learn new things too.
Thank you. All right, we will go back to diplomacy and geopolitics this is a difficult one. How does the relationship between the United States and China affect Taiwan? You've got a tough audience here.
It's a good question. Taiwan issue is the most important issue between China and the U.S. It's a political fundamental stone between China and U.S. relationship. Taiwan, we see it as part of China. The people across the streets are all Chinese. We have the same ancestors, we have the same culture, philosophy, same language. Yeah. Yeah. Philosophy. Yeah. Yes. We're both Chinese. So, Taiwan issue is caused by the civil war in China. We were divided. As President Lincoln used to say, a house divided cannot stand against itself. The same with China. Look at the history, China is a united kingdom from the Qing dynasty, thousands of years ago. So unification is a dream of the Chinese people, not only domestic, all over the world. During World War II, you might not know that's the Carroll declarations announced the Taiwan and the Penghu Islands return to China. President Roosevelt is the first U.S. president, a very strong opinion to support China to sign the agreement. And also later they have a Potsdam proclamation, also recognize the agreement arrangement in Carroll declarations. So this is a consensus by the world, the one China policy, one China principles. And in 1979, we established a relationship with the United States. We have 3 joint communiques. And this is hardship discussions between China and U.S. We call this great efforts by Dr. Kissinger. We call it secret diplomacy. But this 3 joint communique reached is consensus between China and U.S. to respect one China principles, to recognize China as part of China, Taiwan is part of China. Those are the principles we should be abide to dealing the Taiwan issues between China and the United States. Even today, President Biden met President Xi Jinping several times. He also assured us United States do not support Taiwan independence, do not support one China, one Taiwan, or 2 Chinas. We attach great importance to these promises. We think Taiwan issue is related to the peace or war. Only we can handle the issue properly, looking at the history, the China and the US relationship going smoothly. Otherwise, if there's a crisis across Taiwan Straits, our relationship in the bad time. So that's we all say one China principle and the 3 joint communiques is the foundation stone between China and US relationship. We can follow this, we will handle the Taiwan issue in the proper way. We Chinese people, we never say Chinese people will never fight Chinese people. We still want peaceful reunification. That's what we're doing now. Strive always our best to realize the reunifications. And I firmly believe this is as common aspirations of all the Chinese people all over the world. But if there's the interferes on Taiwan issues, if there's attempts to want to separate Taiwan from mainland China, we will do our best, like our former minister, current minister Qin Gang said, we will even give our lives to safeguard our sovereignty and national security. We use in Chinese, 中国人愿意拼命也要捍卫祖国的完整和领土主权。He always ask me that if you ask US people on the street, do you know about Taiwan? Do you want to fight for Taiwan for their independence? He might think most of the American people, they know nothing about Taiwan. They don't, why should we fight for US? But if you ask any Chinese on the streets in China, do you want to give your life to fight for the unification of Taiwan? I think most of the Chinese people will say yes. That doesn't mean so we have to fight with the US on this issue. We still have good cooperation in the past to prevent the independence of Taiwan. We still have dialogues to back to the right track of one China principles, abide by the 3 joint communiques. We still have the efforts to make the dream come true. Thank
you. In my China politics class, the extra credit paper requires students to propose a resolution to the Taiwan question that meets both the needs of mainland China and the needs of the people in Taiwan. If they do a good job, that's a real accomplishment. But to the question is what difference does the U.S.-China relationship make to the Taiwan question is very relevant. Because I've always felt like when you start looking at what does mainland China really need with regard to Taiwan? And that, my interpretation is, they really need Taiwan not to be independent. On Taiwan, what they really need is to be able to continue the life that they have now without being coerced to live a life differently. Well, even my students can find a way and resolve both of that. So I've always felt if you could get 3 smart people from Taiwan and 3 smart people from the mainland, put them in a room for a couple of days and hammer out an agreement, they could do it. It really isn't that hard. The problem is, and it relates directly back to the question, is a matter of trust. Could both sides trust and believe that whatever agreement was worked out would be honored in perpetuity by both sides? That's the real sticking point. And trust is a direct function of the quality of the relationship between the United States and China, because they're the two main actors there. So it's a very relevant question. And I think the issue is the better that the US-China relationship is, if those two countries can have trust with each other, then it paves the way for a resolution to be made on Taiwan that both sides could acknowledge because they would trust the outcome.
All right, thank you. So this next question is listed in the category of education, but I think many of our panel may wish to address it, perhaps. The question is this: many misconceptions about China persist among the American people. What can we do to correct these misconceptions and promote understanding of China and its people? Misperceptions, misunderstandings. Americans misunderstanding China.
I guess I could put my course online and force every American to study, because that's certainly something that I address. That's a difficult question because there is so much to learn about China, and not many people have the bandwidth in their everyday lives to really do that. But when you get to the point where we have to make important decisions on issues in the bilateral relationship, that's when it behooves the American people to do some research and really find out what the issues are. And again, I would say, write your congressman and tell them that you're being too superficial about this, what about this, what about that, when you have the interest. China is such a fascinating place. I'd love for all Americans to be really interested in it, but we're gonna have to focus a little bit more as a practical measure.
So I would think from the side of China, we also need to do something. So like educator, I realize we also should do something more. That maybe there's a difference in terms of thinking or mindset. So talking about the speeches today, I really love Professor Griffith's speech. Not only have some principles, but also a story. So I think we Chinese, we're not that good at telling story, because it's a story really touching people. So we also need to do that, and we also should teach the student how to communicate with the outside world.
I also have the similar questions when I met my counterpart in State Departments. So what we discuss is, do you think the misleading or misunderstanding about China? They also ask me, what is Chinese side misunderstanding about U.S.? So I would say there's some misunderstanding. China is not a U.S. threat. We never bet U.S. lose. We never bet on U.S. on decline. There might be some voices in China. Actually, a lot of U.S. scholars also write essays about the U.S. They are not on the upslope, but on the downslope. But this is discussions is good. Otherwise, we will stay isolated, to avoid meeting, to avoid communication, to know each other better, especially in current situation. I do think there's a lot of ideology discussions, to use some narrative like the democracy vice authorizations. This is old methods. I mean, there's a Cold War's methods to divide the world. In globalization, in the digitalized era, we should not divide the world in this way. Every country have their own ways for development based on their own culture, system, and national conditions. So we get to know each other. We should give each other the rights to have a better development. So I still think that communications, especially to understand each other, is the best way to give the rights to have a better development. I used to still think that the United States, they know China a lot. They can read it from the Chinese Renmin日报, CCTV, the official media, to know about China's policy. But also we have to read every day in the morning, to read the US media, especially a lot of resolutions from the Capitol Hill. In the past, the first 3 months this year, there were over 100 bills in the Capitol Hill relating with China. I really confused. They spend so much money from the taxpayers only discuss about China, not the U.S. domestic affairs. Our National People's Congress here is our focus on our domestic affairs. The competition between China and U.S. is to focus yourself, how to strengthen your ability to develop fast. This is a positive competition, not to only try to set obstacles for each other. We still learn. We learn a lot from U.S. In the 1978, our former leader Deng Xiaoping opening up. Actually, this is the same time we established a relationship with the United States. So China emerging into the world, hug the world, have made great progress, and especially with the United States. And the U.S. company also benefit a lot through China's opening up and reform policies. In 2001, China joined WTO, especially we finished the consultation and reached agreement with the United States. Again, we can see that China is the second opening up and reform. Still work with the United States. We work together to fight 2009 international economic and financial crisis. That's where we see that the G20. Yeah. Our leaders, they reach agreement to work together to fight the challenges, global challenges like financial crisis, climate changes, etc. So we still believe that in the long run, facing the futures, we can still work together. We have to work together. But definitely, the misunderstanding, misleading information really cause a lot of trouble for us. Yeah. So that's why we hope more communication can continue, especially the people-to-people exchanges, the trade cooperations, and also even the joint research on combat the global challenges can push forward our relationship. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a chance for me to promote a little bit about the 4CS model and China team's 5C models. In the long run, in the education direction, I mean, as a university, as an educator, we should, think about what kind of new generation we can, foster. And in America, CP21, there are four C's model, can partly represent the most Americans educators' point of view. The 4 C's means communication. Keep in mind. And collaboration, can put aside. Critical thinking. It's the core competency for a people. We Chinese team, we just follow, we just employ, we keep open mind. Okay, you're America, we learn from you, we agree with you. The two competency. If we can nurture our new generation through kind of open mind, through effective communication, we can decrease a lot of misunderstanding, a lot of misconception. If we think about the issues, all kind of issues, if we can use a kind of a critical thinking to see America, to see China, to see China-America relationship, we can, we will not just follow a kind of media. This media, this side, another media, definitely to the opposite. How we can make a right judgment? We need critical thinking. Okay, we Chinese team, we put the culture competency, culture understanding, and the culture heritage. We cherish our own culture. We open mind to learn from the other culture. Then we can have our value, like Professor Yi's, the value to the world, 世界观. We have shared the humanities, treasure. We come to a right direction. We use communication and use critical thinking, other like collaboration, other core competencies. We will, make our education to a right direction. We will nurture the good, high quality generation, and definitely we will have a more bright future and then decrease the kind of misconception. Okay, that's mine.
Thank you all. All right, the next question is related to fintech. So, Professor Yi, you're on the hot seat again. Do you picture Chinese fintech companies expanding more into the United States market in the future? And why or why not? Will Chinese fintech companies expand into the American market more in the future?
I wouldn't think so. Because U.S. market is not an easy market. It's a difficult market, especially in the sector of finance. It's a so matured market. So that's why you don't have the fintech giants growing up, because already so many incumbent financial institutions existing there. So why China fintech companies can growing up? Because there's so much demand. So relatively speaking, for the business perspective, it's a much more easy market to do business. So I would say that.
Okay, thank you. All right, here's one that gets back to the theme of mutual understanding. The student asks, are there any artists, authors, books, or movies that you feel that more Americans, especially university students, should follow, read, or watch that would lead to a better understanding of China and its people? You get to assign some homework.
Let me do. The first one can be not a good answer. We will have followers. In terms of the kind of media and education, right? China is we talk about China and the US. I always use a word, very simple. Actually, I don't know. I don't know much complex English word. Developing and develop. Developing and develop, just ED and ING, but it's really different. Very, a lot of difference can come from the ED and ING. China, sometimes we regard it as, maybe very not open. Since then we open to the world. In terms of the media, I believe so. The Chinese people, the Chinese young generation, Chinese students, they learn more through US, movies and medias. They spend more time. The English, in Chinese basic education system, K-12, they are the one, almost, the one of the main major, like Chinese, like math, it's English. The students spend a lot of time to learn English. Definitely, there is a different voice right now in Chinese circle. Not effective, so we need BYU support. So generally speaking, Chinese kids, Chinese new generation, they learn a lot for American culture. I just wonder, Chinese, America, they do in terms of media, in terms of movie, TV programs, they are advanced. They are, generate more, excellent products. But Chinese, comparatively, we also in recent, decades, we have generated good, products. I just want, we should, as an important, strategy, we promote this high quality, medias, movies, TV programs, and also draw on more American young generation can learn from this kind of, not politics, not history. It's just a movie. It's just a part of your life. You can learn what kind of lessons from this kind of stuff. I think it's really good idea, good solution. Very soft, but very attractive for new generation. That's my response.
So do you have any specific films you would recommend then?
Here we have a very good case from BYU peoples. Peter, one more time. China, we have a very famous movie. We call 一个都不能少. Zhang Yimou, from the famous Zhang Yimou, right? And there is a female main character, the famous star, right? 什么名字? 魏敏之. The story, the film, it's a little bit talk about the kids in a rural area, and the can be represent a kind of situation about the Chinese situation. Definitely not now. It's now we change a lot, And BYU people like, Peter, Dr. Peter, he found the girl, the main actress, and draw on her to BYU Hawaii campus and study there and living there. And it's so we can, through the movie, through the story, even we can generate a new film, right? Peter, you can think about that. I mean, this is a good story. This is a good film. This kind of film we do generate a lot of through even collaboration between Hollywood, generate a quite a field of high quality movies, even in culture, topic, even in the politics topic. So we can learn from that. I believe so.
I was going to make the same point that there are a number of films that have been made in China, largely by Zhang Yimou, that are all really well done. You've got Hero, you've got Huozhe, you've got Raise the Red Lantern, you've got No Child Left Behind, that are really excellent. All of them, however, are talking about China's past. I struggle, and there's some novels out there, Wild Swans and others, again, that talk about China's past. After China opened up in 1978, there was a freedom to talk about China's past. And it was done very, very well by many Chinese directors and artists. But in thinking about what is a really good movie or novel or something that talks about China presently, I'm not aware of them, but that doesn't mean much because there's a lot of things I'm not aware of. But I sense that it's very difficult to do now. Zhang Yimou, he has had some of his most famous, at least he felt his greatest work was censored in China because it was talking too much about the present. And the sensitivity of political issues in China now makes it difficult to talk about things that are taking place now in China. But if you're looking at China's past, there's really, as was mentioned, some excellent pieces. But then there may be good stuff I'm just not aware of.
So I would like to recommend to the BYU student to some movies, but I cannot exactly remember the name. But there's group of pioneer, so-called pioneer directors. Their movies or documentary films that showed up much more contemporary China. So I would recommend this. So that is a pretty, like Chinese we say, very 小众. So the audience is not that big. Because Zhang Yimou's film is, my view, is too commercialized, too much commercialized. And so I will recommend that a series of films directed by a group of pioneer directors, young directors.
And thank you all. All right, back to geopolitics and international relations. Is any decoupling between the United States and China appropriate? And if so, in what sectors?
Yeah, we do facing the challenge of the decoupling. Nowadays we have over 1,000 company, a Chinese company, on the U.S. sanction list from Department of Finance, Department of Commerce. These huge numbers, including most of them Chinese, the high-tech companies, also the leading company in various areas. We have a joke that if Chinese company if they play a leading role in some specific area, they might face sanction from US side. We have talked during the long time, we talked about Huawei. Yeah. Huawei invented the 5G. Actually, I know that Huawei built a lot of networks for US rural areas. I heard the story because that's in the rural areas, like the US big telecommunication companies, they do not want to spend money on this. It takes a lot of money, it takes a lot of manpower to build the communication network in rural areas. Only service for several hundred people. But Huawei provide a very good quality and cheap solution to this area. I don't think they will try to steal the secret from US high tech. This is a mutual benefit. We can provide better service and quality products even on high tech area. So, but in this way, they're still facing the suppress from US side. They try, I read from the newspaper, not only for the 5G chips, but also even for cut link for 4G. So they will say, do you want to just to limit the Huawei's ability, or just want to kill Huawei to the death? These big issues. I hope this is just rumors. I still think in current situation, in the high-tech area, no one country can solve all the issues. No matter AI, no matter the quantum computer, no matter the Genie product. So we have to think about this. Even Dr. Henry Kissinger, he writes books about the AI. What worries him about is the regulations for the AI world. We not only focus on the technology, we have to set up rules for the AI world might take the place of the human. So I don't think that only one country can set up the rules. They also need the work, the collaborate works for all over the world. When we enter in the AI world, we have to not only facing the technology innovation every day, but we have to worry about the innovation, the learning skills brings more challenges, more difficult for our mankind. So I firmly believe this is very, very important issues for China and the US and other big countries play the leading roles, work together to solve the challenges. Thank you.
I think it's the question is properly worded in getting us to look at what industries might make more sense than other industries. The vast majority of the trade between the U.S. and China takes place in manufacturing, retail. Starbucks has more outlets in Shanghai than any other city in the world. That sort of stuff is fine, not an issue at all. Where it becomes an issue is when national security comes into play. And that's why there's such sensitivity about the highest tech chips and capabilities of intelligence collection, stuff like that. I just don't see any other way that there is going to be to avoid decoupling in high tech. It's just the issues are too sensitive there and they involve national security, and I just see it happening. But it's important to remember what's going on here. When you decouple, the first thing you're doing is you're making the industry less economically efficient because You know, it's just if you can't have free trade, you're always going to have less economic efficiency. And if you do, say, as we're doing now in the United States, preventing China from at least overtly being able to get access to certain chips and that, all we're doing is hastening the ability of China to get those chips from some other source. So we may delay their development in certain industries for a period of some years, I don't know. But eventually they'll find them or develop them some other way. And so it's really a stopgap measure in that sense. But given the political sensitivities of the national defense questions, I don't see any way you're not going to have a decoupling in high tech. But that doesn't mean that there makes any sense to have decoupling in the vast number of industries where we do most of our trade.
All right, I'm sad to relate that has to be our last question. So I'd like to thank our panelists for sharing their opinions and their expertise, and thank all of you for a wonderful Saturday.
Our closing remarks will be given by Connor Austin, current co-president of the 2023 BYU China Conference Committee.
现在我们有请2023年杨百翰大学中国分会委员会联席主席艾永康致闭幕词。
So at the concluding of our meeting today, I'd just like to extend a huge wave of gratitude to all those that made this possible, specifically to the committee leaders that made this possible. Just go ahead and give a hand right now to the committee leaders. Seriously, this would not be possible without any of their helps. And we'd also like to thank the advisory board, if any of you are still here. Just know that it also was not possible without you all and your support and your guidance, and especially with Dr. Chan leading that all out. And so we're really grateful for that as well. But most importantly, we really do want to extend that wave of gratitude to the speakers who took time out of their busy schedules to come and spend it with us and be able to share their wisdom and their knowledge. Knowledge that has come through a lifetime of learning, and it's very valuable, and I really hope that everyone here values it as much as they do. One of BYU's mottos is to enter to learn and go forth to serve. We have entered and we have learned, and now it is time to go forth and serve and use the information that they have given us to go out and make the world a better place. And so we actually have some gifts that we'd like to give to the speakers. So if you wouldn't mind coming up here, and we can give you those gifts. And Dr. Chan, I don't know if you want to present the gifts or not. Do you want to present the gifts? They're just right around this corner, but. Okay, so would all the speakers please go ahead and come up? We would love to give you your gift. Okay, thank you once again to all of our wonderful speakers. Okay, now that will conclude our 2023 BYU China Conference. We thank you all for your attendance. We invite you to come to next year's. This is an annual event. And we would also invite all the committee leaders as well as the speakers and any advisory board members that may be here to come up and take a picture together. But thank you all for coming. I guess we'll do a closing prayer. Sorry, I missed that. Sorry.
Let's just go straight to it. Our closing prayer, the prayer to conclude this year's China Conference, will be given by Samantha Huang, Director of On-Campus Marketing.
2023年杨百翰大学中国峰会将正式闭幕，我们将请峰会组委会宣传部部长黄伟善同学做闭幕祷告。
我们在天上慈爱大的天父，天父，我们感谢你，感谢你，我们今天都可以聚集在一起。我们感谢你今天很美好的天气，我们都能平安。天父，我们很感谢到访的所有的演讲者他们的分享。我们祈求您可以让圣灵都可以陪伴我们在座的每一位，也让我们每天都可以做正确正义的选择。天父，我们爱你，我们以上谦卑祷告是奉你爱子耶稣基督的名，阿门。